The World War II memorial gleamed in the afternoon sun as visitors moved between its granite columns. Among them walked an old man and a teenager, moving slower than the others, but with a purpose that set them apart. The old man's weathered right hand rested on a polished wooden cane, while his left sleeve hung empty at his side. "This way, Jack," Michael Reynolds said to his grandson, guiding him toward the section dedicated to the European theater. They stopped before a display case containing a model of an American Sherman tank. Michael stared at it silently, the lines in his face deepening. "Is that what you drove in the war, Grandpa?" Jack asked. Michael smiled faintly. "Not drove," commanded. He reached out, his fingertips hovering just above the glass. "They called it the Ronson lighter because of how easily it caught fire when hit. The Germans could punch through our armor from over a mile away." He paused. "But we called it home for 11 months. Jack studied his grandfather's face, noting the distant look in his eyes. "Is this the same kind of tank you commanded at Normandy?" Michael turned to his grandson, his expression changing. "No, Jack. This is the kind of tank that saved my life when I was a 24-year-old kid who knew nothing about real war, but had to command 22 of them against the best tanks the world had ever seen." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. "I've never told you the whole story, have I?" Michael said, his voice softer now. Jack shook his head. "Perhaps it's time." Fort Knox, Kentucky, January 1944. Captain Michael Reynolds stood perfectly straight as Colonel Harrison inspected the line of new Sherman tanks. The winter air bit through his uniform, but he didn't allow himself to shiver. As the training officer for the new tank commanders, he had to set an example. "These men ready for combat, Captain?" Colonel Harrison asked without looking at him. "Yes, sir. 8 weeks of training completed. They know these machines inside and out." Harrison turned to him, his eyes narrowed. Harrison was old Army, a veteran of the Great War with a reputation for brutal honesty. "And you, Reynolds, you ready?" Michael hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Of course, sir." Harrison made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. "Of course, the son of General William Reynolds. West Point, top of your class in tank theory." He rapped his knuckles against the Sherman's hull. "Theory." Michael felt heat rising to his face, but kept his expression neutral. It wasn't his fault that he'd spent the war so far training others rather than fighting. Someone had to turn civilians into tankers. "My office, 1,700 hours, Harrison said, then walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. When Michael reported to Harrison's office that evening, he found the colonel studying a map of Europe, glasses perched at the end of his nose. "Sit down, Reynolds." Michael sat, posture still rigid. Harrison pushed a folder across the desk. "Orders, you're being reassigned." Michael opened the folder. Inside was a transfer to the 66th Armored Regiment, 2nd Armored Division. Company Commander, C Company. "Sir, I don't understand. I'm scheduled to begin training the next group of tank commanders next week." Harrison removed his glasses. "Plans change. The division is shipping out to England next month. They need commanders with experience." "But sir, my experience is in training, not combat, which is precisely why I argued against this." Harrison's voice hardened. "But your father has friends in Washington. They think the son of a war hero deserves his shot at glory." Michael felt as though he'd been slapped. "I never asked for special treatment. No one ever does." Harrison leaned forward. "Listen carefully, Reynolds. You're about to command men in combat, real combat, not the training fields of Kentucky, the beaches of France, the fields of Europe, against an enemy that's been fighting for years." He stood and walked to a cabinet, returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. He poured them each a measure and pushed one toward Michael. "C Company, 22 tanks, 22 crews, 5 men per tank. That's 110 men whose lives depend on your decisions." Harrison took a drink. "Most of them have never seen combat either. The difference is they don't have captain in front of their names." Michael didn't touch his glass. "I understand the responsibility, sir." Harrison's laugh was bitter. "No, you don't, but you will." He finished his drink in one swallow. "I fought in France in 18, saw men torn to pieces by artillery, but what you're heading into?" He shook his head. "The German Tiger can kill a Sherman from 2 kilometers away. Your gun can barely penetrate its armor at 500 meters. Michael had taught those very specifications in his classes. The numbers were stark on paper. In reality, they would be written in blood. "The survival rate for Sherman crews against Panthers and Tigers is 4 in 10, Harrison continued. "And that's with experienced commanders." Michael finally reached for his drink. What advice can you give me, sir? Harrison's expression softened slightly. Find good men, learn from them. Forget half of what you learned in books. He paused. And write letters to your wife every chance you get. The colonel stood, signaling the end of the meeting. As Michael reached the door, Harrison spoke again. Reynolds, your father was a good man and a fine general, but he never had to make the kind of decisions you're about to face. Remember that. Michael nodded and left, the folder heavy in his hands. Camp Forest, Tennessee, March 1944. The rain fell in sheets, turning the training ground into a sea of mud. Michael stood under a canvas shelter, watching his tankers struggle with their maintenance tasks. 3 months into training, and C Company was beginning to take shape. Sir, a voice came from behind him. The new crew for Tank 5 has arrived. Michael turned to find Sergeant Walsh, his company first sergeant, standing at attention despite the rain plastering his uniform to his body. Thank you, Walsh. Have them report to me after they've settled in. Already told them, sir. They're waiting in your office. Michael nodded and made his way through the camp to his quarters. Inside, 4 men stood at attention. He took a moment to study them before speaking. The oldest was a weathered man with gray threading through his dark hair. Beside him stood a stocky, powerful-looking Hispanic man. The third was taller, with glasses and an academic look about him. The fourth was barely more than a boy, with a farmer's tan and nervous eyes. At ease, gentlemen. I'm Captain Reynolds, your company commander. They relaxed slightly. You'll be the crew of Tank 5, one of 22 in C Company. I'd like to know who I'm working with. The oldest man spoke first. Technical Sergeant William Gaines, sir. Gunner, 3rd Infantry Division until reassignment. Served in North Africa and Sicily. Michael nodded. A combat veteran. Good. Experience with tanks, Sergeant? No, sir. I was artillery, but I can hit what I aim at. That's what matters. What about civilian life? Hunter and guide in Montana, sir. Before that, I worked the railroads. A pause. Lost my son at Kasserine Pass. He was a tanker. The weight of those words filled the room. Michael met the man's eyes and saw no accusation there, only a determined grief. I'm sorry for your loss, Sergeant. Gaines nodded once. The stocky man stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Joe Martinez, sir. Loader. No combat experience. I worked at U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh before enlisting. Strong arms are good for a loader, Michael noted. Any experience with machinery? Yes, sir. Operated a crane on the factory floor. Good with mechanical things. The taller man adjusted his glasses. Sergeant First Class Charlie Thompson, radio operator. I was teaching mathematics at Boston Latin School before the war. Education? MIT, sir. Electrical engineering. Michael raised an eyebrow, impressed. And how did you end up in tanks? I enlisted for Signal Corps, but they said they needed men in armor. I go where I'm needed, sir. The youngest man stepped forward last, clearly nervous. Private First Class Johnny Parker, sir. Driver. From Oskaloosa, Iowa. Previous experience, Parker? Farm equipment, sir. Tractors mainly. Never drove a car before the Army got hold of me. A flush crept up his neck. But I'm learning fast. Top scores in driver training. Michael studied them. A grief-stricken hunter. A steel worker. A mathematics teacher. A farm boy. Not exactly the crew he would have chosen from a textbook, but there was potential. You men are joining a company that's been training for 3 months. We ship out to England in 3 weeks. That gives you 21 days to become a team and learn your tank inside and out. Sergeant Gaines, as the ranking NCO, your tank commander under my overall command. Gaines nodded. Understood, sir. Any questions? Martinez raised his hand. Sir, what's our tank like? We heard rumors about the new Shermans with the 76mm guns. Michael hesitated. We have the standard M4A3 with the 75mm gun, not the newest models. He saw the flicker of disappointment in their eyes. They'd all heard about the superior German tanks. One more thing, Michael said. In training, you'll hear the other crews call their tanks by nicknames. That's fine among yourselves, but in my company, we use proper designations in all radio communications. Clarity saves lives. They nodded, but Michael could see them exchanging glances. He was being too rigid, too by the book. They were probably wondering what kind of commander he would be. He was wondering the same thing himself. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of training. Michael pushed his company relentlessly, determined to prepare them for what lay ahead. He spent his evenings studying intelligence reports on German armor, memorizing capabilities, weaknesses, tactics. Tank 5's crew proved to be quick learners. Gaines brought his combat experience, helping the others understand the realities beyond the training manual. Martinez had a natural feel for the rhythm of loading the gun. Thompson mastered the radio protocols faster than anyone Michael had seen. And Parker, despite his youth, showed an intuitive grasp of handling the 30-ton machine. The night before they were to board the trains that would take them to the East Coast, Michael was reviewing final equipment checklists in his office when there was a knock at his door. "Enter," he called. Colonel Harrison stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Michael rose quickly. "Sir, I wasn't expecting you." "Sit down, Reynolds," Harrison said, taking a seat himself. "I came to see how your company is shaping up." "They're ready, sir, as ready as they can be with the time we had." Harrison nodded. "I spoke with your first sergeant. He thinks highly of you." Michael felt a small surge of pride. Walsh was not a man who gave praise easily. "That surprised me," Harrison continued, "given your reputation as a by-the-book commander." "Sir, the men have taken to calling you Professor behind your back. Not the worst nickname for a commander, but not one that inspires confidence in combat." Michael absorbed this information. He knew he wasn't the most approachable officer, but he'd thought his commitment to preparation would earn respect. "What matters is whether they'll follow your orders when shells start falling," Harrison said. "They will, sir." Harrison's expression was unreadable. "I've arranged a small addition to your company. A platoon of the new Shermans with the 76mm guns will be joining you in England. 5 tanks. They'll give you some extra punch against the German armor." "Thank you, sir. That will make a significant difference." Harrison waved away his gratitude. "Don't thank me yet. There's something you should know." He leaned forward. "When you land in France, your company will be assigned to the spearhead. You're going to be among the first armor units pushing inland from the beaches." Michael felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "I understand, sir." Harrison studied him for a moment. "Do you? Because what I'm telling you is that C Company is being positioned as a sacrifice. Your job will be to find the German armor, engage them, and reveal their positions for the main force coming in from the south." The colonel's words hung in the air between them. "How many of my men know this?" Michael asked quietly. "None, and that's how it should stay." Michael's mind raced. He had spent months preparing these men, building them into a fighting unit, and now he was learning that their primary purpose was to draw enemy fire. "Sir, with all due respect, if that's our mission, my men deserve to know the risks." Harrison's expression hardened. "Your men signed up to fight a war, Captain. They know the risks. Your job isn't to prepare them for death. It's to give them the best chance at survival while accomplishing the mission." Michael fell silent, processing this. Harrison stood. "For what it's worth, I argued against this assignment, said your company wasn't ready, but higher command believes your textbook knowledge of German armor makes you uniquely qualified." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Prove me wrong, Reynolds. Bring your men home." After Harrison left, Michael sat in silence for a long time. Through the thin walls of his office, he could hear his men in the barracks next door. They were laughing, singing, some probably writing final letters home before shipping out. 110 men, his responsibility. He pulled out the company roster and began to read through it again, committing each name to memory. If he was leading them into the jaws of death, the least he could do was remember who they were. England, June 5, 1944. The coastal staging area was organized chaos. Thousands of men, vehicles, and supplies being positioned for the greatest amphibious invasion in history. C Company's tanks were already loaded onto the LSTs that would carry them across the channel. The men waited in tense silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Michael moved among them, checking equipment, answering questions, offering what reassurance he could. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on all of them. He found Tank 5's crew sitting together, Gaines cleaning a hunting knife while the others played cards. "Gentlemen," Michael greeted them. They started to rise, but he waved them back down. "As you were, how are you holding up?" "Ready to get moving, sir," Martinez answered. "Sitting around gives a man too much time to think." Michael nodded. "We'll be moving soon enough." Parker looked up from his cards. "Sir, is it true what they're saying, that we're going in tomorrow?" "Can't confirm that, Parker, but be ready." Michael turned to Gaines. "Sergeant, a word?" They stepped away from the others. Up close, Michael could see the lines of fatigue in the older man's face. "Everything all right, Sergeant?" Gaines tucked the knife into his boot. "Fine, sir, just making sure everyone's prepared." "And are they?" Gaines considered the question. "Thompson and Martinez are solid. Parker's nervous, but that's natural for his first action." He looked directly at Michael. "The boy's going to need a steady hand when things get hot." Michael understood the subtext. Parker would be looking to both of them for leadership. "I'll do my part, Sergeant." Gaines studied him for a moment. No disrespect intended, sir, but have you ever been under fire? The question was direct, but not challenging. A commander wanting to know his officer's capabilities. No, Michael admitted. My experience is in training, not combat. Gaines nodded, seeming to appreciate the honesty. Theory and practice are different animals, sir. So Colonel Harrison keeps reminding me. A hint of a smile crossed Gaines' weathered face. Harrison's a good man. Saw him at Cantini in 18. Fearless. You fought in the last war? Last few months. Was just a kid like Parker. Gaines looked back at the others. That's why I watch out for him. Reminds me of myself and of my son. Michael felt the weight of the man's loss. Your son was in tanks? Sherman. Like us. Burned up inside when they took a hit from an 88. Gaines's voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected a pain that time hadn't dulled. They say the new tanks are better protected. Michael couldn't bring himself to lie to this man. The armor's the same, but the tactics we've developed should give us an edge. Gaines seemed to appreciate the honesty. We'll make it work, sir. As Michael turned to leave, Gaines spoke again. One piece of advice, Captain. When the shooting starts, remember that your men are watching you. They don't expect you to be fearless, just steady. The words stayed with Michael as he continued his rounds. By late afternoon, the briefing he'd been waiting for finally came. He gathered his platoon leaders in a guarded tent where a large map of the French coast was displayed. Gentlemen, this is it. Tomorrow morning, Operation Overlord begins. Our company lands at Omaha Beach at H-hour +3. He outlined their objectives: landing, moving inland, supporting the infantry and taking key crossroads, and then pushing toward Quarantaine, where intelligence suggested German armor was concentrated. The German 21st Panzer Division is believed to be in the area, equipped with Mark IV tanks and possibly Panthers. We may also encounter elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division with Tiger tanks. The mention of Tigers caused a visible reaction among his officers. Our mission is to engage enemy armor and secure the roadways for the follow-up forces. Michael continued, carefully avoiding any mention of their role as bait. We'll be operating in what the locals call bocage country terrain, with high hedgerows that limit visibility and movement. This negates some of the Germans' range advantage. He went through the rest of the briefing methodically, covering communications, rally points, and contingency plans. When he finished, he looked at each of his officers in turn. Any questions? Lieutenant Collins, his executive officer, spoke up. Sir, what's the artillery support situation? Limited initially. Naval gunfire will support the landing, but once we move inland, we'll be dependent on the divisional artillery. They'll be coming in behind us. Collins nodded, his expression grave. One last thing, Michael said. When we land tomorrow, we'll be making history. The men know that. They also know the risks. Your job is to keep them focused on their immediate tasks. Take it one moment at a time, understood? A chorus of yes, sir, answered him. Dismissed. Get some rest. Tomorrow will come early. After the others filed out, Collins lingered. Something on your mind, Lieutenant? Collins lowered his voice. Sir, I overheard some staff officers talking earlier. They were saying our company is being sent in to locate the German armor positions, to draw them out. Michael kept his expression neutral. We're reconnaissance by fire, Collins. That's our job. With all due respect, sir, that sounds like a suicide mission. Michael stepped closer. Every tank company on that beach tomorrow has a dangerous mission. Ours is no different. What matters is how we execute it. Collins didn't look convinced. The men deserve to know what they're facing. The men know they're going into combat against a determined enemy with superior equipment, Michael replied, his voice firm. Telling them anything more would only increase anxiety without providing any tactical advantage. Collins straightened. Yes, sir. Lieutenant, I selected you as my XO because you have good judgment. I need that now more than ever. You have it, sir. Collins hesitated. I just want to bring as many of them home as possible. As do I, Lieutenant, as do I. After Collins left, Michael sat alone in the tent, staring at the map. The colored lines and symbols represented the greatest military operation in history, but they couldn't capture what waited on those beaches. The fear, the chaos, the killing. For all his study and preparation, tomorrow would take him into the unknown. He had spent years teaching others how to fight in tanks. Now he would have to prove he could do it himself. The Channel 16-19 forward. Dawn broke over a sight unprecedented in military history. Thousands of ships of every description filled the horizon, carrying the might of the Allied forces toward the coast of France. Michael stood on the deck of the LST, carrying his command tank and three others. The cold spray whipped against his face as he stared toward the still, distant shoreline. Behind him, his radio man was checking communications with the other vessels carrying C Company. All elements accounted for, sir, the radio man reported. Michael nodded without turning. Maintain radio discipline. Next check in 5 minutes before landing. The big naval guns had been firing for hours, pounding the German defenses. The sound rolled across the water like distant thunder. In the gray light, Michael could see the silhouettes of bombers passing overhead, adding their payloads to the bombardment. A voice spoke from behind him. "Hell of a thing, isn't it, sir?" He turned to find Gaines standing there, his face impassive as he surveyed the armada. "Largest invasion in history," Michael replied. "Not what I meant." Gaines nodded toward the shore. "All that firepower, and the Germans are still going to be waiting for us." It was a sobering thought. Despite the massive bombardment, intelligence suggested that many of the German positions remained intact. "The men ready?" Michael asked. "As they'll ever be." Parker's sick as a dog from the rolling. Thompson's checking the radio for the 10th time. Martinez is sleeping, if you can believe it. Michael smiled slightly. Different ways of handling the weight. Gaines studied him. "And how about you, Captain? How are you handling it?" The question was asked without challenge, one soldier to another. "By focusing on what needs to be done next," Michael answered honestly. "Once we hit the beach, there won't be time for anything else." Gaines nodded, seeming to approve of the response. "Mind if I ask what got you into tanks, sir?" "Most officers I know prefer infantry or artillery. More traditional." Michael considered the question. "My father was infantry, a general in the Great War. I wanted something different." He paused. "And I was good with machines. The technical aspects appealed to me. But not the fighting?" Michael met the older man's gaze. "I'm prepared to fight, Sergeant." Gaines held up a hand. "No offense meant, sir, just trying to understand my CO before the shooting starts." Michael realized that Gaines was doing what any good NCO would do, assessing the officer he'd be following into battle. "My father used to say that any fool can fight," Michael said after a moment. "The trick is fighting smart. That's what I hope to bring to this company." Gaines seemed to weigh this answer. "Fair enough." He looked back toward the shore, now visible as more than just a dark line on the horizon. "We'll find out soon enough." The LST's engines changed pitch as they approached the landing zone. Around them, smaller craft were already heading for the beach, loaded with infantry. The naval bombardment intensified, focusing on the German positions overlooking the landing zones. "Best get below, sir," Gaines said. "We'll be dropping the ramp soon." Michael nodded and made his way to where his tank waited. He climbed aboard and dropped into the commander's hatch, settling into the familiar confines of the turret. Around him, his crew was already at their stations. "Comms check," he ordered. "Radio operational, sir," came the response from the operator below him. "Driver ready," reported the man at the front of the tank. "Gunner ready," from his right. "Loader ready," from behind the gun. Michael pulled his throat microphone into position. "C Company, this is Company Actual. Prepare for landing. Maintain intervals. Follow your platoon leaders to the rally point once ashore. Acknowledge." The responses came in order, each tank reporting ready. The LST shuddered as it ground to a halt. Moments later, the massive front ramp began to lower, revealing the beach ahead. Already the scene was one of chaos. Burning vehicles dotted the shoreline. Men moved through the surf, some falling as machine gun fire raked the water. "Driver, forward when the ramp is down," Michael ordered, his voice calm despite the hammering of his heart. "Gunner, scan for targets. Radio, report our landing to battalion." The tank lurched forward as the ramp splashed into the water. They descended into the surf, the Sherman's engine straining as it pushed through the waves. Water sloshed over the front slope, but the waterproofing held. As they ground up onto the beach, Michael raised himself in the turret for a better view. The situation was worse than it had appeared from the ship. The beach was narrow, bordered by steep bluffs. German fire poured down from concealed positions. Ahead, the exits from the beach were choked with disabled vehicles and blocked by obstacles. "C Company, hold position at the seawall," he ordered. "Wait for engineers to clear the exits." His tank rolled forward through the carnage, pushing past groups of infantry taking cover wherever they could find it. A shell exploded nearby, rocking the Sherman and showering it with sand. Michael ducked instinctively. They reached the seawall that ran along the base of the bluffs, providing some cover from the direct fire from above. The other tanks of C Company were arriving, taking positions along the wall. An infantry captain appeared beside Michael's tank, shouting to be heard above the din. "You need to get your tanks up that draw." He pointed to a narrow gap in the bluffs. "We're pinned down here." Michael studied the opening. It was partially blocked by a disabled truck, and the ground around it was strewn with mines and barbed wire. "We need engineers to clear that first," Michael replied. "We'll be sitting ducks if we try now." The captain's face was streaked with dirt and blood. "We don't have time to wait. My men are dying here." Michael understood the man's desperation, but rushing tanks into a minefield would only add to the casualties. "I'll send 2 tanks to provide covering fire," he decided. "The rest wait for clearance." The captain didn't look happy, but nodded and moved off. Michael relayed the orders, designating 2 tanks to take up positions where they could fire on the German emplacements above. Then he turned his attention to the tactical situation. The landing was clearly not going as planned. The preliminary bombardment had failed to neutralize the German defenses. The beach was becoming more congested by the minute as men and vehicles piled up against the seawall. A decision had to be made. They couldn't stay where they were, but moving inland without proper support was equally dangerous. Before Michael could issue new orders, the radio crackled to life. "All elements Omaha Beach. This is command. Engineers moving to clear beach exits. Hold positions until clearance is given. Expect friendly naval fire danger close to bluff positions." Minutes later, the big guns of the warships offshore opened up again, this time targeting the German positions directly above the beach. The ground shook with the impacts. At the same time, combat engineers moved forward, working to clear obstacles and mines from the exits. For an hour, C Company waited, providing fire support where possible but unable to advance. The scene on the beach was apocalyptic. Medics moved among the wounded, bodies washed in the surf. The air was thick with smoke, the noise deafening. Finally, word came that the main exit was being cleared. Engineers had pushed the disabled vehicles aside and cleared a lane through the minefield. "C Company, prepare to move," Michael ordered. "First platoon, take point. Second and third, follow in column. Headquarters element with me at the rear." The tanks began to move, threading their way through the chaos toward the exit. As they approached the gap in the bluffs, German fire intensified. A shell struck the lead tank, but fortunately glanced off its turret without penetrating. "First platoon, smoke the hillside," Michael ordered. White phosphorus shells erupted against the German positions, creating a smoke screen. Under this cover, the company began to move up the draw, engines straining against the steep incline. Michael's tank was the last to enter the gap. As they ground upward, he kept his eyes on the slopes above, watching for any movement. The Germans would know exactly where they were. Tank tracks were impossible to hide. At the top of the draw, the land opened into the Norman countryside. Hedgerows divided the landscape into a patchwork of small fields, the perfect terrain for ambushes. "All elements maintain formation," Michael ordered. "First platoon, scout ahead to the first road junction. Second platoon, secure our flanks. Third platoon, watch our rear." As his tank crested the rise, Michael finally had a moment to absorb what they had just survived. Omaha Beach already had a reputation as Bloody Omaha among the men who had landed there. Many wouldn't be leaving. But for C Company, the real test was just beginning. Somewhere ahead, hidden among those hedgerows and villages, the German armor waited, and Michael's tanks were rolling straight toward them. "Sir," his radio man called up, "battalion on the line, they want a situation report." Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Tell them SOC Company is proceeding to Objective 1. 21 tanks operational, awaiting further orders. 1 tank lost during landing. Not bad, given the circumstances. But he knew that was just the beginning. The real bloodletting would come when they encountered the Panthers and Tigers. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, C Company moved cautiously through the Norman countryside. The hedgerows limited visibility to a single field at a time, forcing the tanks to advance blind to what lay beyond each obstacle. By mid-afternoon, they had reached their first objective, a crossroads village called St. Laurent. The place appeared deserted, but Michael was taking no chances. "First platoon, secure the north end. Second, the south. Third, establish a perimeter. I want reconnaissance of all approaches." The tanks took their positions, covering the roads leading into the village. Infantry began to arrive behind them, moving through the buildings to clear them. Michael directed his driver to position their tank in the village square, where he could coordinate the company's movements. As they waited, he studied his map, plotting their next move. According to intelligence, elements of the 21st Panzer Division were operating in this sector. Their objective was to push inland to link up with other American forces and secure the roads that the follow-up divisions would use. But Michael knew their true purpose was to locate and engage German armor, revealing their positions for the main force. A scout from the infantry reported to Michael's tank. "Captain, we found tracks. Panzer IVs by the look of them. Headed east toward Carentan." Michael nodded. "Recent?" "Within the last few hours, sir." So it began. The hunt was on, and they were following a trail that would inevitably lead to contact with the enemy. Contact that, given the superiority of German tanks, would be deadly for his Shermans. But that was the mission. Find the enemy armor, engage them, allow the main force to maneuver to advantage, even if it meant sacrificing C Company in the process. As the sun began to set on their first day in France, Michael gathered his officers in the village church, using the nave as an impromptu command post. Maps were spread across the altar. "We'll hold here for the night," Michael informed them. "Establish a defensive perimeter. Tomorrow at first light, we push east toward Carentan." Lieutenant Collins studied the map. "That's where intelligence puts the German armor, sir." "That's correct," Michael confirmed. "Our mission is to locate and engage enemy armor to secure the roads for the follow-up divisions." The officers exchanged glances. They all understood what that meant. "Questions?" Michael asked. There were none. Each man knew what was expected of him. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll test everything we've trained for." As the officers dispersed to their units, Collins remained behind. "A word, sir?" Michael nodded. "The men are talking," Collins said quietly. "They know what we're heading into. Rumors about the new German tanks, the Tigers." Michael considered his response carefully. "What are you hearing specifically?" "That the 76mm Sherman platoon that was supposed to join us in England got redirected to another division. That we're on our own against tanks we can't penetrate from the front." Michael frowned. This was the first he'd heard of the promised 76mm tanks being reassigned. "Is that true, sir?" Collins pressed. "I haven't received any official word," Michael replied honestly. "But for now, we proceed with what we have." Collins lowered his voice further. "Sir, without those upgraded tanks, we're sending our men into a slaughter." The words hung in the air between them. Michael felt the weight of them pressing down on his shoulders. Collins was right, but what choice did they have? "We have our orders, Lieutenant," he said finally, "and we'll carry them out to the best of our ability. The men need to see us confident, not questioning the mission." Collins straightened. "Yes, sir." After Collins left, Michael remained in the church, alone with his thoughts and the weight of command. The setting sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored light across the ancient stones. A sound at the door made him turn. Sergeant Gaines stood there, his silhouette backlit by the fading daylight. "Permission to enter, sir?" "Granted." Gaines approached, his eyes taking in the maps spread across the altar. "Planning tomorrow's movement?" "Yes, we push east at dawn." Gaines nodded, toward the German armor. There was no point denying it. "That's the mission." "The men know, sir. They're not fools." Michael studied the veteran's face. "And how are they taking it?" "Like soldiers. They're scared, but they'll do their duty." Gaines paused. "Parker asked me today what it's like to face a tiger." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That it's the most terrifying thing he'll ever see, and that his best chance is to trust his training and his crew." Michael appreciated the man's honesty. "Sound advice." "There's something else you should know, sir." Gaines's expression was grave. "Word came down that the 76mm platoon we were promised isn't coming. They got sent to Utah Beach instead." So Collins had been right. They truly were on their own. "I see," was all Michael could manage. "The men are wondering if command knows what they're sending us into," Gaines continued, "or if they just don't care." Michael felt a flash of anger, not at Gaines but at the situation. "Of course they know. That's precisely why we're here." The words came out before he could stop them. Gaines's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir?" Michael sighed. He hadn't meant to reveal this, but perhaps Gaines at least deserved to know. "Our mission isn't just to secure roads, sergeants. It's to locate the German armor, to make contact, to draw them out so the main force can engage them with superior numbers." Understanding dawned on Gaines' weathered face. "We're the bait." That's one way of putting it. Gaines absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Does anyone else know?" "Lieutenant Collins suspects. I'd prefer to keep it that way." "The men deserve to know what they're facing, sir." "What good would it do them, Sergeant? Make them more afraid? Less effective?" "Or more prepared," Gaines countered. "Men who know they're walking into danger take fewer risks. They watch more carefully. They survive." Michael considered this perspective. It ran counter to his training, which emphasized maintaining morale by controlling information. But Gaines had seen more combat than he had. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "But for now, let's focus on preparation. Make sure your crew gets rest and checks their equipment. Tomorrow will come early." Gaines saluted. "Yes, sir." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Captain. If we do run into tigers, remember that they're big and powerful, but they're not invincible. Their side armor is weaker. Their turret traverses slowly, and their crews are just men like us." After Gaines left, Michael returned to his maps, studying the terrain they would cross tomorrow. The Norman countryside, with its ancient hedgerows and narrow lanes, would limit the Germans' advantage in range and firepower. If his tankers were smart, if they used the terrain, if they fought as they trained, they might have a chance. But deep down, Michael knew the odds were against them. C Company was being sacrificed for the greater objective. His job wasn't to prevent that sacrifice, but to make it count. Outside, darkness fell over the battlefield. The sounds of men preparing for tomorrow drifted through the village. Some were writing letters home. Others cleaned their weapons. A few sang quietly. In the morning, they would move east, toward the waiting German armor, toward the tigers, toward a confrontation that few of them were likely to survive. And Michael Reynolds, who had never faced enemy fire, would lead them into it. Morning broke over Normandy with a gentle mist clinging to the hedgerows. In the village of Saint Laurent, the men of C Company stirred from whatever rest they had managed to find. The sounds of tanks being prepared for combat filled the air as crews checked tracks, engines, and weapons. Captain Michael Reynolds stood in the village square, reviewing the day's objectives with his platoon leaders. The maps spread before them showed their planned route toward Carentan, where intelligence suggested German armor was concentrated. "First platoon will take point," Michael instructed. "Second will cover our right flank, third our left. Command element will remain in the center of the formation. Maintain radio contact at all times." Lieutenant Collins studied the map with concern. "Sir, these hedgerows severely limit visibility. Each field is essentially a separate battlefield." "Precisely why we'll advance cautiously," Michael replied. "No tank is to proceed beyond a hedgerow until the area has been scouted. We'll leapfrog forward, providing covering fire for each other." The officers nodded their understanding, though their expressions remained grave. They all knew what awaited them. "One last thing," Michael said. "Intelligence suggests we may encounter elements of the 21st Panzer Division, possibly equipped with Panther tanks. We've all studied their capabilities. Remember your training. Use the terrain to your advantage. Aim for track assemblies or side armor when possible." Questions? There were none. Each man understood his role in the coming operation. "Dismissed. We move out in 30 minutes. As the officers returned to their units, Michael climbed aboard his command tank. He found Sergeant Gaines already at his position in the turret, binoculars scanning the surrounding countryside. "Morning, sir," Gaines greeted him without lowering the binoculars. "Beautiful country. Shame we have to fight over it." Michael nodded in agreement. The Norman landscape was indeed picturesque, with its rolling fields and ancient hedgerows. In peacetime, it would be a place of beauty and tranquility. "Your crew ready?" Michael asked. "As ready as they'll ever be." Gaines finally lowered the binoculars, turning to face his commander. "Parker didn't sleep much. First combat jitters. Martinez spent half the night praying. Thompson's been checking the radio since 0400. And you?" A faint smile crossed Gaines's weathered face. "I've seen enough combat to know worrying doesn't help. You either prepare as best you can or you don't. After that, it's in God's hands." The pragmatic faith of the veteran was reassuring. Michael wished he shared it. "I spoke with the men this morning," Gaines continued. "Not just my crew, but others as well. They know what we're heading into. They're not naive." Michael tensed slightly. "What exactly did you tell them?" "Nothing they hadn't already figured out. That we're looking for German armor, that the terrain works both for and against us." Gaines met Michael's gaze directly. "That if we work together, we have a fighting chance." Michael studied the older man for a moment. Gaines had walked a careful line, preparing the men without undermining morale. "Thank you, Sergeant." The rest of the crew arrived at the tank. Parker, the young driver, looked pale but determined. Martinez, the loader, carried an extra bandolier of ammunition. Thompson, the radio operator, was adjusting his headset. "Morning, Captain," Thompson greeted him. "Battalion reports and all elements are in position. We're cleared to advance." Michael nodded. "Very well. Driver, start engine, radio, inform all elements to prepare to move out." The Sherman's engine roared to life, adding to the growing chorus across the village as the other tanks prepared to move. Michael took his position in the turret, standing tall enough to survey his company. 21 tanks, lined up and ready, 105 men under his command. How many would return? The question hung in his mind, unwelcome but unavoidable. C Company, this is Company Actual. He spoke into his throat microphone. Move out according to plan. Maintain radio discipline. Report all contacts immediately. The convoy began to move, tanks filing out of the village onto the narrow country road. As they passed the last buildings, Michael couldn't help but notice the uneasy silence from the few remaining villagers who watched them from doorways and windows. These people had seen war before, had lived under occupation for years. They knew what followed in the wake of tanks. The first hour passed without incident as C Company moved steadily eastward. The landscape was a patchwork of small fields separated by hedgerows tall enough to hide a tank. Each field had to be entered cautiously. Each hedgerow approached as a potential defensive line. First platoon reports road junction ahead, Thompson called up from the radio. Small hamlet, no movement observed. Tell them to hold position, Michael ordered. Second and third platoons to secure the flanks. The company halted as scouts moved forward to reconnoiter the hamlet. Michael used the opportunity to survey their surroundings through his binoculars. The morning mist had burned away, leaving clear visibility under a bright summer sky. Movement, Gaines said suddenly. 2 o'clock, near that church steeple. Michael shifted his binoculars. At first he saw nothing. Then a glint of metal caught his eye. Tank, he confirmed. Panzer IV, by the profile. As he watched, a second tank appeared, then a third. They were moving into position along the edge of the hamlet. They're setting up a defensive line, Michael observed. Radio, alert all elements. Enemy armor at the hamlet. At least 3 Panzer IVs identified. This was the moment they had been training for. The first armor engagement for C Company in the European theater. Orders, sir? Thompson asked. Michael considered their options. The German tanks were deployed along a hedgerow at the edge of the hamlet, giving them excellent cover. A frontal assault would be costly. Tell 1st Platoon to hold the position and provide covering fire. 2nd Platoon to move up on the left flank. 3rd Platoon will circle around to the right, using that line of trees for cover. The orders were relayed and the company began to move into position. Michael's command tank remained with the 1st Platoon, providing a central point of coordination. Gunner, range to target? Michael asked. Gaines adjusted the gunner's sight. Approximately 1,000 meters to the nearest Panzer, sir. At the edge of our effective range, Michael noted. The Sherman 75mm gun lost penetrating power beyond that distance. We'll need to get closer for a killing shot, Gaines agreed. Side armor only at this range. Michael watched as the 2nd and 3rd platoons began their flanking maneuvers. If all went according to plan, they would catch the German tanks in a crossfire, hitting them from 3 sides simultaneously. Minutes ticked by as the units moved into position. Michael kept his binoculars trained on the hamlet, noting every detail of the German deployment. Then a new movement caught his eye. New contact, he announced, behind the church, larger profile. Gaines shifted his own observation. Jesus, he muttered, that's a Panther. The distinctive silhouette of the German tank was unmistakable. Longer gun, sloped armor, larger chassis than the Panzer IVs, a far more dangerous opponent. Radio, alert all elements, Michael ordered. Panther identified at the hamlet. Priority target. This changed the equation significantly. The Panther's 75mm gun had nearly twice the range of their Shermans, and its frontal armor was virtually impenetrable to their weapons. 2nd platoon in position, Thompson reported. 3rd platoon 60 seconds out, came another update. Michael made his decision. Tell 2nd platoon to open fire on the leftmost Panzer IV. 1st platoon will target the rightmost. 3rd platoon will engage the Panther from the flank when in position. The orders were barely relayed when the quiet morning erupted in violence. The German tanks, apparently alerted to the American movements, opened fire first. A shell screamed overhead, exploding in the field behind them. All elements, commence firing, Michael commanded. The Shermans of 1st Platoon fired in near unison, their 75mm guns belching flame and smoke. A return fire from the Germans answered immediately. A shell struck the ground near Michael's tank, showering it with dirt and debris. Through his binoculars, Michael saw one of their rounds hit a Panzer IV, but it glanced off the front slope without penetrating. Adjust aim, he ordered. Target tracks and side armor. The battle unfolded with frightening speed. 2nd Platoon, firing from the left flank, scored a direct hit on a Panzer IV's side armor. The German tank erupted in flames, its crew bailing out through hatches. But the victory was short-lived. The Panther, now fully alert to the threat, traversed its long gun toward the second platoon. Its first shot found its mark, striking a Sherman squarely in the front. The American tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from the hatches. "Panther targeting second platoon," Michael shouted into his radio. "Third platoon, engage now." The Shermans of third platoon emerged from the tree line to the right of the hamlet, guns blazing. They were firing on the move, reducing accuracy but making themselves harder targets. The Panther swiveled to meet this new threat, its 75mm gun finding another victim. A Sherman from 3rd Platoon took a direct hit, its turret flying off in a catastrophic explosion. "No survivors from Tank 12, Thompson reported grimly. "Tank 7 is burning, crew status unknown." 2 tanks lost in the opening minutes. The battle was going exactly as Michael had feared. "1st Platoon, advance," he ordered. "Close the distance while the Panther is engaged with 3rd Platoon." His own tank lurched forward as Parker engaged the engine. The Sherman bounced across the uneven field, closing the gap to the German positions. "Range 800 meters, Gaines reported. "Fire at will," Michael commanded. Gaines sighted on one of the remaining Panzer IVs and fired. The shell struck home, penetrating the German tank's side armor. Smoke began to pour from the stricken vehicle. But the Germans weren't done yet. The Panther, having dispatched 2 Shermans from 3rd Platoon, turned its attention back to the advancing 1st Platoon. "Panther traversing toward us," Gaines warned. "Evasive action." "Driver, hard left," Michael ordered. Parker threw the tank into a sharp turn just as the Panther fired. The shell passed close enough that Michael felt the displacement of air. Around them, the battle raged. American and German tanks exchanged fire in a deadly duel. The air filled with smoke and the thunder of guns. "Tank 3 has a hit on the Panther," Thompson reported excitedly. "Track damaged." Michael quickly assessed the situation. The Panther, though immobilized, still had a functioning turret and gun. It was rotating to engage Tank 3. "Tell Tank 3 to take cover," Michael ordered. "All elements, concentrate fire on the Panther." The remaining Shermans poured fire into the German tank. Most shells bounced harmlessly off its thick frontal armor, but a few found the weakened side where the track had been hit. Finally, after absorbing nearly a dozen hits, the Panther succumbed. Flames erupted from its engine compartment, followed by secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. The crew attempted to escape, but machine gun fire from the American tanks cut them down. The remaining Panzer IV, seeing the destruction of its companions, began to withdraw, using smoke grenades to cover its retreat. "Hold fire," Michael ordered. "Let it go." As the smoke cleared, he surveyed the battlefield. 3 German tanks destroyed, 1 escaped. But the victory had come at a cost. 4 Shermans lost, with most of their crews dead or wounded. "Radio, status report from all elements," Michael commanded. As Thompson relayed the reports, Michael climbed out of the turret to get a better view of the situation. The hamlet was now largely abandoned, German infantry having pulled back with their remaining tank. "Sir," Thompson called up, "battalion on the line. They want a situation report." Michael took the handset. "This is Captain Reynolds. C Company has engaged enemy armor at grid reference 734982. 3 German tanks destroyed, 1 Panther and 2 Panzer IVs. 1 Panzer IV withdrew eastward. We've lost 4 tanks with casualties." The response was immediate. "Understood, Captain. Hold your position and continue to Objective Charlie when the area is secure. Intelligence reports increased enemy armor activity near Carentan. Expect contact." "Acknowledged," Michael replied. "Request air support for our advance." "Negative on air support. All assets committed elsewhere. Proceed according to mission parameters." The message was clear. They were on their own and expected to continue toward even heavier German armor concentrations. "Understood, Reynolds out." Michael returned the handset to Thompson, his mind already calculating their next move. The company was down to 17 tanks. The engagement had proven they could handle Panzer IVs, but the Panther had been a different story. And intelligence suggested there might be Tigers waiting ahead. "Your orders, sir?" Collins asked, his tank having pulled alongside Michael's. "We secure the hamlet, tend to our wounded, and continue the mission," Michael replied. "Have 3rd Platoon establish a perimeter. 2nd Platoon will search the hamlet. 1st Platoon remains in reserve." Collins hesitated. "Sir, we lost nearly 20% of our strength in that engagement. If we encounter more Panthers, or worse Tigers—" "I'm aware of the odds, Lieutenant," Michael cut him off. "But our mission remains. We locate enemy armor and engage them to reveal their positions." "Even if it means the destruction of this company," Collins pressed. Michael met the younger officer's gaze. If necessary, yes, that's what we're here for. He softened his tone slightly. But I intend to accomplish our mission with as many of these men surviving as possible. That means smart tactics and using the terrain to our advantage. Collins seemed to accept this, nodding once before returning to his tank. As the company reorganized, Michael remained atop his tank, studying the countryside ahead. The road continued east toward Carentan, winding through more hedgerow country. Perfect terrain for ambushes. Gaines climbed up beside him. First blood, the veteran observed. The men held up well. We got lucky, Michael replied. That panther could have done more damage if 3rd Platoon hadn't arrived when they did. Luck's part of war, sir. So is timing. Gaines surveyed the burning German tanks. They weren't expecting us to hit them from 3 sides at once. Good tactics. The praise from the experienced NCO meant more than Michael would admit. It won't be so easy next time. They'll adapt. So will we, Gaines replied confidently. The boys learned more in this one engagement than in all their training. Michael nodded. Combat was indeed the ultimate teacher, though the tuition was paid in blood. What do you make of our next objective? He asked, showing Gaines the map. Carentan, intelligence puts elements of both the 21st Panzer and 12th SS Panzer divisions in the area. Gaines studied the terrain. More hedgerows, some urban areas, rivers and streams that'll channel our movement. He pointed to a particular area. This high ground south of town would be where I'd put my heavy armor if I were them. Good fields of fire. Michael had reached the same conclusion. That's my assessment as well. We'll need to approach from multiple directions, deny them the chance to concentrate their fire. Their planning was interrupted by Thompson. Sir, reports from 2nd Platoon. They've captured a German officer in the hamlet. Lieutenant Collins thinks you should speak with him. Michael and Gaines exchanged a glance. Potentially valuable intelligence. Stay with the tank, Sergeant. I'll see what our guest has to say. Michael found Collins in what had once been the village's small cafe. The German officer sat at a table, his hands bound before him. He was young, perhaps no more than 25, with the distinctive uniform of a panzer officer. He speaks English, Collins informed Michael, and he's been surprisingly forthcoming. Michael pulled up a chair across from the prisoner. I'm Captain Reynolds, United States Army. You are? Lieutenant Karl Weber, 21st Panzer Division, the German replied with a slight accent. His posture remained rigid, proud despite his captivity. You commanded one of those panzers? Weber nodded. The Panther, a magnificent machine, don't you think? Far superior to your Shermans. There was no taunting in his tone, merely a statement of what he considered fact. Yet it burns just as well when hit in the right spot, Michael observed. A flicker of emotion crossed Weber's face. My crew, did any? Michael shook his head. None survived. I'm sorry. Weber absorbed this news with a slight slump of his shoulders. They were good men, experienced. As were those in the tanks you destroyed, Michael replied evenly. The German officer nodded once, acknowledging the point. The universal brotherhood of tankers transcended national boundaries. They understood each other's losses. Lieutenant Collins says you've been cooperative, Michael continued. Why by not? Weber met his gaze directly. The war is lost. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Germany cannot stand against such force forever. He gestured toward the window where American tanks and troops were visible. This invasion will succeed. I am not a Nazi fanatic. I am a soldier. I did my duty. Now I wish to survive. It was a surprisingly frank assessment. What can you tell me about German armor deployments in this area? Weber seemed to consider how much to reveal. Finally, he said, my battle group was the forward element. 3 Panzer IVs and my Panther. We were screening for a larger force. Michael tensed. What larger force? Elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division, moving to counter your advance toward Carentan. Weber's eyes held a warning. They have Tigers, Captain. At least a battalion strength. 45 tanks. The number hit Michael like a physical blow. 45 Tigers against his remaining 17 Shermans. Where exactly are they positioned? He asked, keeping his voice steady. As of yesterday, assembling near the high ground south of Carentan. Likely moving forward today to establish defensive positions along the approach roads. It aligned with intelligence reports, but hearing it confirmed was still jarring. C Company was heading straight for a force that could annihilate them. Why tell me this? Michael asked. Weber shrugged slightly. As I said, I wish to survive. Being cooperative improves my chances as a prisoner. And perhaps, he hesitated, perhaps I've seen enough death already. Michael studied the man, trying to detect any deception. but the German's weary expression seemed genuine. "Thank you for the information, Lieutenant. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention." As Michael rose to leave, Weber spoke again. "Captain, a word of advice from one tank commander to another." Michael paused. "The Tigers are formidable, but not invincible. Their turrets traverse slowly. Their fuel consumption is enormous. In this terrain with these hedgerows, their advantages in range and frontal armor are somewhat negated." Weber's expression was earnest. "Use the terrain, attack from multiple directions, force them to turn their turrets. And whatever you do, don't engage them at long range and open ground." It was sound tactical advice, echoing what Michael had already considered. He nodded his thanks before leaving. Outside, he found Collins waiting. "Well, sir?" "His information confirms our intelligence," Michael replied. "The 12th SS is moving Tigers into defensive positions ahead of us." Collins paled slightly. 45 of them? According to our guest, yes. Against our 17 Shermans? Collins shook his head. "Sir, that's not a battle, that's a suicide mission." Michael couldn't disagree, but their orders remained unchanged. "Radio battalion, inform them of what we've learned. Request reinforcement if possible." As Collins moved to comply, Michael returned to his tank, his mind racing with the implications of Weber's information. C Company was being sent directly into the path of a superior enemy force, outnumbered and outgunned, exactly as Colonel Harrison had warned. Gaines was waiting at the tank, his expression questioning. "Tigers," Michael said simply. 45 of them, according to our prisoner." The veteran's face remained impassive, but his eyes reflected understanding of what that meant. "We continue east?" he asked. "Those are our orders." Gaines nodded slowly. "The men should know what we're facing." This time, Michael didn't disagree. "Assemble the tank commanders. I'll brief them before we move out." 30 minutes later, the surviving tank commanders of C Company gathered around Michael Sherman. The mood was somber following their first taste of combat, but there was also a new confidence born from their initial success. "Gentlemen," Michael began, "our prisoner has confirmed what intelligence suggested. Elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division are establishing defensive positions between us and Corentin. This includes approximately 45 Tiger tanks." The information landed heavily among the group. The men exchanged glances, some muttering under their breath. "I won't sugarcoat this," Michael continued. "The Tiger is the most formidable tank on the battlefield. Its 88mm gun can penetrate our armor at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Its own frontal armor is nearly impervious to our 75mm guns at most combat ranges." "So how do we fight them, sir?" one of the platoon sergeants asked. "By using the terrain to our advantage," Michael replied, pointing to the map spread across the hood of his tank. "The hedgerow country negates much of the Tiger's range advantage. We'll never engage them in open ground if we can avoid it. Instead, we'll use these enclosed fields to get close, targeting their weaker side and rear armor." He outlined the plan he'd been developing. The company would advance in 3 separate columns, using parallel country lanes. They would move from field to field, maintaining mutual support, but never bunching up to present an easy target. "We'll coordinate by radio. When one element makes contact, the others will maneuver to hit the enemy from the flank or rear. Remember, a Tiger's gun is devastating, but it can only point in one direction at a time, and its turret traverses slowly." The commanders listened attentively, asking questions about specific aspects of the plan. Michael was impressed by their focus and professionalism despite the daunting odds they faced. "One last thing," he said as the briefing concluded. "This mission is critical to the overall advance from the beachhead. By locating and engaging the German armor, we allow our follow-up forces to maneuver more effectively." He met each man's eyes in turn. "I won't lie to you. This will be dangerous. We will take losses, but every Tiger we identify or destroy potentially saves dozens of American lives elsewhere." The men nodded their understanding. They were soldiers. This was their duty. "We move out in 10 minutes. Dismissed." As the commanders returned to their tanks, Collins approached Michael. "Battalion's response, sir," he reported. "They acknowledge our report, but have no reinforcements available. All units are committed. We are to proceed according to mission parameters and report all enemy contacts." It was what Michael had expected, but the confirmation still stung. They were on their own. "Very well, Lieutenant. Let's get moving." C Company resumed its advance eastward, now spread across a wider front in 3 columns as Michael had planned. The summer sun beat down on the tanks as they moved cautiously through the Norman countryside. In Michael's tank, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Parker guided the Sherman along the narrow lane with skill, navigating around shell craters and debris. Thompson maintained constant radio contact with the other elements. Martinez checked and rechecked the ammunition supply. Gaines remained in the turret alongside Michael, both men scanning the terrain ahead for any sign of the enemy. "How are you holding up, Parker?" Michael asked the young driver. "Fine, sir," came the response, though his voice was tight with tension. "Just keeping my mind on the road." "You're doing well," Michael assured him. "Your handling during the engagement this morning saved us from a direct hit." The small praise seemed to bolster the young man's confidence. They continued for several miles without incident, the only sounds the rumble of the Sherman's engine and the occasional radio check between units. The hedgerow country stretched endlessly before them, each field a potential battlefield, each hedgerow a potential defensive line. Then Thompson's voice broke the relative quiet. "Contact report from 1st Platoon, left column. German reconnaissance vehicles spotted ahead." "Tell them to hold position," Michael ordered. "Are the vehicles armored?" After a moment, Thompson relayed the answer. "Armored cars, 3 of them. They appear to be screening something behind them." Michael and Gaines exchanged a glance. Reconnaissance elements typically operated ahead of main forces. "The Tigers," Gaines murmured. "Likely," Michael agreed. "Radio all elements. Halt advance. 1st Platoon is to hold position, but not engage unless fired upon. 2nd and 3rd Platoons prepare to move on my order." The company halted its advance, tanks finding cover where possible along the hedgerows. Michael used his binoculars to scan the area ahead, though the terrain limited his visibility. "Sir," Thompson called up, "1st Platoon reports the armored cars are withdrawing. They appear to be falling back to a defensive line approximately 1 kilometer ahead." "They've spotted us," Michael observed, "and now they're drawing us toward their main force." "A trap," Gaines agreed. Michael considered their options. The most cautious approach would be to hold position and request air or artillery support. But those assets were unavailable, according to Battalion. Their mission was to locate and engage enemy armor, not avoid it. "We spring the trap," he decided, "but on our terms. Radio all elements. 1st and 2nd Platoons will advance along their current routes but halt 500 meters from the reported defensive line. 3rd Platoon will circle wide to the south, using that stream bed for cover, and position themselves to hit the enemy flank." The orders were relayed, and the company began to move according to the new plan. Michael's tank advanced with 2nd Platoon, using the hedgerows for cover whenever possible. As they approached the area where the German reconnaissance had been spotted, Michael ordered all tanks to reduce speed and advance with extreme caution. Each hedgerow crossing became a moment of heightened tension, each new field a potential killing ground. "Movement ahead," Gaines reported suddenly. 2 o'clock, near that stone farmhouse. Michael trained his binoculars on the area. At first, he saw nothing, then a massive form emerged from behind the building. "Tiger," he breathed. The German heavy tank was instantly recognizable at its boxy hull, thick armor, and the dreaded 88mm gun that protruded from its turret. As Michael watched, a second Tiger appeared, then a third. "Radio all elements," Michael ordered, his voice calm despite the hammering of his heart. "Tigers confirmed at grid reference 742998. At least 3 visible. Hold positions." Even as the message was relayed, more German tanks emerged from concealed positions along the distant hedgerow. Not just Tigers, but Panthers as well. A formidable armored force arrayed in a defensive line across C Company's path. "They're waiting for us to come to them," Gaines observed. "Classic ambush position." Michael nodded. "And we're going to disappoint them. Radio 3rd Platoon, what's their status?" "Still moving into flanking position," Thompson reported after checking. "Estimate 15 minutes before they're in position." 15 minutes was a long time with enemy armor in visual range. But rushing the maneuver would only alert the Germans to their strategy. "Tell all elements to maintain positions and remain concealed," Michael ordered. "No movement, no firing unless fired upon." The minutes crept by with excruciating slowness. Michael kept his binoculars trained on the German positions, noting the placement of each tank, estimating ranges, identifying potential weaknesses in their formation. "They've left their right flank relatively unprotected," he observed to Gaines. "Overconfident. They don't expect us to circle that far south." "Arrogance is a weakness we can exploit," Gaines agreed, "but those Tigers are still the most dangerous tanks on the battlefield, which is why we don't engage them from the front," Michael replied. "We hit them from the side and rear where their armor is thinner." Finally, Thompson reported that 3rd Platoon was in position. It was time to execute the plan. "All elements, prepare to advance on my command," Michael ordered. 1st Platoon will move forward and draw their attention. Second platoon will provide covering fire from current positions. Third platoon will engage from the flank on my signal. He took a deep breath, knowing that what happened next would determine the fate of many of his men. First platoon, advance. The tanks of first platoon emerged from their concealed positions, moving forward toward the German line. As expected, the Tigers immediately traversed their turrets to track the approaching Shermans. Second platoon, commence firing. Target the rightmost tanks in their line. The Shermans of second platoon opened fire from their covered positions. Most shells fell short or bounced harmlessly off the Tigers' frontal armor, but they succeeded in drawing attention. The German line erupted in return fire. The distinctive crack of the 88mm guns echoed across the battlefield as they targeted the advancing American tanks. First platoon, deploy smoke and continue advance, Michael ordered. Smoke rounds from the Shermans created a drifting screen, partially obscuring them from the German gunners. But the Tigers continued to fire, using their superior optics to target through the smoke. Tank 8 is hit, Thompson reported. Direct hit from an 80. Michael watched through his binoculars as one of the first platoon Shermans erupted in flames. There was no sign of survivors. The plan was working, however. The German tanks were focused entirely on the frontal attack. Their turrets pointed away from their exposed flank. Third platoon, commence attack, Michael ordered. From their concealed position to the south, the tanks of third platoon emerged, racing across open ground toward the exposed flank of the German line. They closed the distance rapidly, firing on the move. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Taken by surprise, the German tanks at the end of the line began to traverse their turrets toward this new threat. But the Tigers' notoriously slow turret rotation worked against them. Before they could bring their guns to bear, the Shermans of 3rd Platoon were firing at their vulnerable side armor from close range. Hit confirmed on rightmost Tiger, Thompson reported excitedly. It's burning. Through his binoculars, Michael saw the German tank erupt in flames, its ammunition exploding in a catastrophic detonation that blew its turret completely off. Second platoon, advance, Michael ordered. Support third platoon's attack. His own tank lurched forward as Parker engaged the engine. They emerged from cover, racing toward the now disorganized German line. The battlefield devolved into chaos. Tigers and Panthers attempting to deal with attacks from multiple directions. Shermans maneuvering aggressively, firing from the move, targeting the vulnerable sides and rears of the German tanks when possible. Panther at 11 o'clock, Gaines shouted. Range 400 meters. Gunner, target identified, Michael confirmed. Fire when ready. Gaines sighted through periscope and fired. The Sherman 75mm gun roared, sending a shell streaking toward the German tank. It struck the Panther's side armor, penetrating and igniting something inside. Smoke began to pour from the stricken vehicle. But the victory was short-lived. An 88mm shell from a Tiger passed so close to their turret that Michael felt the displacement of air. Tiger targeting us, Gaines warned. 2 o'clock. Driver, evasive action, Michael ordered. Gunner, target that Tiger. Parker threw the tank into a hard turn just as another 88mm shell whistled past. Gaines traversed the turret, searching for the threat. I can't get a clear shot from this angle, he reported. Its frontal armor is facing us. Michael made a split-second decision. Driver, continue past it. We'll circle back and hit it from behind. Parker pushed the engine to its limits, the Sherman accelerating across the field. They passed directly in front of the Tiger, momentarily vulnerable to its devastating gun. But the German tank was slow to traverse its turret, the shell impacting the ground behind them as they sped past. Hard right at the hedgerow, Michael commanded. Circle around behind it. Parker executed the maneuver perfectly, the Sherman crashing through a weak point in the ancient hedgerow. They found themselves in the adjacent field, now behind the Tiger that had been targeting them. Gunner, target the rear armor, Michael ordered. Range 200 meters. Gaines sighted and fired without hesitation. The shell struck the Tiger's engine compartment, penetrating its thinner rear armor. The German tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its engine. Target immobilized, Gaines reported. Fire again, Michael ordered. Ensure destruction. A second shell finished the job, igniting the Tiger's fuel and ammunition. The crew attempted to escape through the hatches, but machine gun fire from nearby Shermans cut them down. The battle continued to rage across the fields. 3rd Platoon had succeeded in destroying 3 German tanks from the flank, but was now taking heavy losses as the remaining Tigers oriented to the threat. 3rd Platoon reports 3 tanks remaining operational, Thompson relayed. Lieutenant Harris is dead. Sergeant Wilson has assumed command. Tell Wilson to withdraw his platoon behind the southern hedgerow, Michael ordered. First platoon to continue frontal pressure. The coordinated attack from multiple directions was working, but at a heavy cost. C Company had already lost 6 more tanks, bringing their total losses to 10 out of their original 22. A massive explosion drew Michael's attention. One of the first platoon Shermans had taken a direct hit from a Tiger, the catastrophic detonation throwing its turret 30 feet into the air. Status of first platoon? Michael demanded. 4 tanks operational, Thompson reported after checking. Lieutenant Collins is requesting permission to withdraw. They're taking heavy fire. Michael surveyed the battlefield. The German line was in disarray, with tanks facing in multiple directions trying to deal with threats from both front and flank. But they still outnumbered the remaining American tanks, and each Tiger was worth several Shermans in combat power. Tell Collins to use smoke and withdraw behind the western hedgerow, Michael decided. Second platoon will cover their retreat. As the orders were relayed, Michael noticed a change in the German deployment. Several of their tanks were beginning to pull back, using smoke grenades to cover their movement. They're withdrawing, Gaines observed. They've had enough. Michael wasn't so sure. The remaining German tanks, approximately 7 Tigers and 5 Panthers, were falling back to a secondary position around the stone farmhouse. It looked less like a full withdrawal and more like a tactical repositioning. They're consolidating their defense, Michael assessed, pulling back to stronger ground. The moment presented a choice. C Company could press the attack, pursuing the withdrawing Germans. Or they could hold position, consolidating their own forces before deciding on next steps. Michael thought about their mission parameters. Locate and engage enemy armor, revealing positions for follow-up forces. They had accomplished that. The location and approximate strength of the German armor was now known. But pursuing the withdrawing Germans would likely result in more American casualties. The Tigers, even in retreat, remained deadly opponents. All elements, hold position, Michael ordered. Do not pursue, regroup at the western hedgerow. The remaining tanks of C Company disengaged, falling back to the designated rally point. As they assembled, Michael took stock of their situation. Of the original 22 tanks, only 11 remained operational. More than half the company was gone. Collins approached Michael's tank once they had established a defensive perimeter. The lieutenant looked exhausted, his uniform stained with smoke and grime. We've got wounded that need evacuation, Collins reported, and we're low on ammunition, especially armor-piercing rounds. What's the status of your crews? Michael asked. Shaken but holding together, Collins replied. They're proud of what they accomplished. We destroyed at least 5 Tigers and 3 Panthers. That's no small feat. It was indeed impressive, especially for Sherman tanks facing the cream of German armor. But the cost had been high. Radio battalion, Michael instructed, report our situation and request resupply and medical evacuation. As Collins moved to comply, Gaines joined Michael atop the tank. The veteran surveyed the distant German position, where the remaining Tigers and Panthers had established a new defensive line. They're dug in now, Gaines observed, using that farmhouse as an anchor. Be even harder to dislodge them. Michael nodded. We've accomplished our primary mission. Located and engaged enemy armor, confirmed their strength and disposition. What now, sir? We hold this position until relieved or ordered to withdraw, Michael replied. Battalion will send reinforcements now that we've confirmed the German strength. Gaines seemed skeptical. And if they don't? It was a fair question. So far, Battalion had been reluctant to commit additional resources to support C Company's mission. Then we'll adapt, Michael said simply. As we've been doing. The sun was beginning to set by the time Collins returned with Battalion's response. They acknowledge our situation, he reported. No immediate reinforcements available, but elements of the 2nd Infantry Division should reach our position by tomorrow morning. We're to hold our current position and continue to observe enemy movement. Medical evacuation? Michael asked. Ambulances are en route, expected within the hour. Michael nodded, relieved that at least their wounded would receive proper care. And our ammunition situation? Resupply convoy following the ambulances, Collins confirmed. They're bringing additional armor-piercing rounds and replacement crews for our operational tanks. It was better news than Michael had expected. Battalion was supporting them, even if they couldn't immediately provide armor reinforcements. Very well, establish a rotating watch schedule. Half crews on alert at all times. The rest can get some rest. As darkness fell over the battlefield, C Company settled into defensive positions along the hedgerow. The distant German tanks were occasionally visible by their movement, but no further engagement occurred. Michael remained in his turret, watching the enemy lines through night vision binoculars. Gaines had gone to check on the other crews. ensuring they were following proper protocols for their night defense. Thompson's voice came from below. "Sir, battalion commander on the line for you." Michael took the handset. "Captain Reynolds." "Reynolds, this is Colonel Mitchell," came the gruff voice. "I've received your reports. Good work locating that Tiger battalion." "Thank you, sir. We've confirmed at least 12 Tigers and 8 Panthers in their deployment. We've destroyed approximately 8 of them, but at significant cost to my company." "Understood. That's why I'm calling." "New orders." Mitchell's tone became more formal. "At 0600 tomorrow, you will advance and engage the German armor at their current position." Michael was stunned. "Sir, with all due respect, I have 11 operational tanks remaining. The Germans still have at least 12 heavy tanks in defensive positions." "I'm aware of the odds, Captain," Mitchell replied, "but the 2nd Infantry Division's advance depends on neutralizing that German armor. If those Tigers are allowed to relocate during the night, they could devastate our infantry when they move up." Michael's mind raced. "Sir, wouldn't it be more effective to wait for air support or artillery to soften their positions first?" "All air assets are committed elsewhere," Mitchell stated flatly, "and artillery hasn't been effective against Tigers. You've proven that Shermans can kill Tigers with the right tactics. You will do it again tomorrow." The orders left no room for interpretation or appeal. C Company, already decimated from the day's fighting, was being ordered to attack a superior German force head-on. "Yes, sir," Michael responded, military discipline taking over. "We'll advance at 0600. "Good man. Mitchell out." Michael handed the handset back to Thompson, his mind already working through the implications of their new orders. How could he accomplish this mission without sacrificing the remainder of his company? Gaines returned to the tank, climbing up beside Michael in the turret. "Everything quiet on the line," he reported. "The boys are tired but alert." He noticed Michael's expression. "What is it, sir?" "New orders," Michael replied grimly. "We attack at 0600. Gaines absorbed this information without visible reaction, but Michael could sense his concern. 11 tanks against their remaining Tigers and Panthers, the sergeant said finally. "Those aren't good odds." "No," Michael agreed. "They're not, but those are our orders." They sat in silence for a moment, each man contemplating what the morning would bring. "I need to come up with a plan that gives us a fighting chance," Michael said eventually. "Something unexpected. The Germans will be anticipating a direct assault." Gaines studied the distant German position, barely visible in the darkness. "What about a night attack?" he suggested. "Hit them while they're still adjusting to first light. Use the sunrise to blind their gunners." It was a bold suggestion, and not without merit. The Germans wouldn't expect an attack in the half-light of dawn. It would negate some of their advantages in optics and range, Michael agreed, considering the idea, but increase the risk of friendly fire and navigation errors in the hedgerows. "True," Gaines acknowledged, "but surprise might be our only advantage at this point." Michael continued to develop the concept. "If we approach from the east, with the rising sun at our backs, their gunners will be partially blinded. We'd have to move our tanks during the night to get into position," Gaines pointed out. "Risky, but doable if we maintain radio silence and move slowly." The plan began to take shape in Michael's mind. Not a frontal assault as the Germans would expect, but a flanking maneuver under cover of darkness, followed by an attack at dawn with the sun behind them. "It might work," he said finally. "It's certainly better than a direct approach in full daylight." Gaines nodded. "The boys won't like moving at night, but they'll like facing those Tigers head-on even less." Michael made his decision. "Assemble the tank commanders. We'll brief them on the new plan." An hour later, the remaining officers and tank commanders of C Company gathered around Michael's Sherman. Using a flashlight covered with a red filter, Michael outlined his plan on a map spread across the engine deck. "We will execute a night movement and to position ourselves east of the German position," he explained. "We'll move in 3 groups, taking different routes to minimize noise. Engines at lowest possible RPM, radio silence except for emergencies." He traced the routes on the map. "By 5:30, all elements should be in position here, along this tree line east of the farmhouse. The sun will rise at 0547, directly behind our position. At 0600 exactly, we attack, using the sun to blind their gunners." The tank commander studied the plan, asking questions about specific aspects of the night movement and final attack positions. "This is a high-risk operation," Michael acknowledged. "Moving tanks at night through unfamiliar terrain is dangerous, but it gives us our best chance of success against a superior enemy force." The men nodded their understanding. They had seen what the Tigers could do in a direct engagement. Any alternative to that was welcome. We move out in 30 minutes, Michael concluded. Make your preparations. As the commanders returned to their tanks, Collins lingered. It's a good plan, sir. Better than what battalion is expecting us to do. Let's hope it works, Michael replied. Otherwise, we'll be trading 11 tanks for whatever damage we can inflict before we're wiped out. The men know the stakes, Collins assured him. They'll execute the plan. Under cover of darkness, C Company began its risky movement. Tanks rolling at minimal speed, their engines muffled as much as possible, using the hedgerows to screen their movement from German observation posts. Michael's tank moved with the central group, navigating by compass and the occasional glimpse of stars through broken clouds. Parker handled the Sherman with remarkable skill, avoiding obstacles that could have caused noise or thrown a track. The night movement took over 4 hours, with frequent halts to maintain formation and ensure they were on the correct heading. By 0500, all elements had reported reaching their designated positions east of the German defenses. Michael surveyed the battlefield from his new vantage point. In the pre-dawn gloom, he could make out the silhouettes of the German tanks, still oriented toward where C Company had been the previous evening. The surprise movement appeared to have worked. All elements, prepare for attack, he whispered into his throat microphone. 20 minutes to H hour. Around him, the crews made final preparations. Guns were loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Engines were checked. Each man went through his personal rituals before combat. In Michael's tank, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Parker adjusted his seat, ensuring he could reach all controls smoothly. Thompson checked his radio one final time. Martinez arranged the shells in the most efficient position for rapid loading. Gaines sighted through his scope, identifying targets in the growing light. 5 minutes, Michael announced quietly. The eastern horizon was beginning to glow with the approaching sunrise. Soon that light would be directly behind the American tanks, silhouetting the German positions while partially blinding their gunners. 1 minute. Michael checked his watch, the luminous dial showing 0559. 60 seconds to the moment of truth. Remember, he told his crew, target their flank and rear armor whenever possible. Short-range, accurate fire. Make every shot count. The seconds ticked by. Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. C Company, commence attack! The quiet morning erupted into chaos as 11 Sherman tanks emerged from the tree line, engines roaring at full power as they charged toward the German position. The rising sun directly behind them cast long shadows ahead of their advance. For a crucial few seconds, the Germans were caught completely by surprise. Their tanks, oriented toward the west where they expected an American attack, had to traverse their turrets 180 degrees to engage the threat from the east. "First blood to us!" Thompson reported excitedly as one of the Shermans scored a direct hit on a Panther's rear armor, the German tank erupting in flames before it could bring its gun to bear. But the advantage of surprise was fleeting. The German crews recovered quickly, their tanks beginning to turn to face the new threat. "All elements, execute Phase 2, Michael ordered. As planned, the company split into 3 groups, attacking from different angles to prevent the Germans from concentrating their fire. Michael's group headed straight for the farmhouse that anchored the German position. "Tiger at 2 o'clock, Gaines called out. Range 300 meters. "Gunner, target identified," Michael confirmed. "Driver, angle right for better shot." Parker adjusted their course, giving Gaines a better firing angle at the Tiger's side armor. The Sherman's 75mm gun roared, the shells streaking toward the German tank. "Hit," Gaines reported, but no penetration, glanced off the side skirt. "Load armor piercing," Michael ordered. "Fire again when ready." Martinez slammed another shell into the breach with practiced efficiency. Gaines adjusted his aim slightly and fired again. This time the shell found a vulnerability, penetrating the Tiger's engine compartment. The German tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its rear. "Target immobilized," Gaines reported. "Good hit," Michael acknowledged, "but it can still fire. Driver, keep moving. Don't give it a stationary target." All around them, the battle raged. Shermans darting between cover, firing at the flanks and rears of the German tanks whenever possible. The Tigers and Panthers returning fire, their devastating 88mm and 75mm guns claiming American tanks despite the tactical surprise. "Tank 9 is hit," Thompson reported. "Direct hit from a Tiger at the farmhouse." Michael spotted the Tiger in question. It had taken position beside the stone building, using it as partial cover while maintaining a clear field of fire. "All available tanks, target the Tiger at the farmhouse," he ordered, concentrating fire. 3 Shermans, including Michael's, turned their guns on the identified threat. They fired nearly simultaneously, shells impacting the Tiger from multiple angles. One found a weak point, penetrating the turret ring. The German tank began to burn, but the victory was short-lived. Two more Shermans were hit in rapid succession, both catastrophic kills with no survivors visible. "We're down to 8 operational tanks," Thompson updated grimly. The Germans were recovering from their initial surprise, bringing their superior firepower to bear, despite the challenging sun angle. More American tanks would fall if they continued the direct engagement. Michael made a split-second decision. All elements, close to minimum range, get inside their effective fire envelope. It was a desperate tactic, but potentially effective. The massive German tanks had minimum elevation limits on their main guns. If the Shermans got close enough, the Tigers would be unable to depress their guns sufficiently to hit them. "Driver, full speed toward that rightmost Tiger," Michael ordered. Parker pushed the engine to its limits, the Sherman racing across the field directly toward the massive German tank. The Tiger fired, its shell passing over their turret as they closed the distance. "Too close for them to hit us," Gaines observed as they reached the German tank's side. Traversing turret, at this extreme close range, the Sherman's 75mm gun had no trouble penetrating the Tiger's side armor. Gaines fired, the shell punching through and igniting the German tank's ammunition. The resulting explosion was so violent that Michael's tank was rocked by the blast wave. All across the battlefield, the remaining Shermans were executing the same tactic, closing to point-blank range where the German tank's chassis and turret design worked against them. It was incredibly risky. Tank crews referred to it as hugging the enemy, but it was working. "3 more German tanks destroyed," Thompson reported excitedly. "The rest are beginning to withdraw." Michael observed the battlefield through his binoculars. The remaining German tanks, perhaps 4 Tigers and 2 Panthers, were indeed pulling back, using smoke grenades to cover their retreat. "All elements, hold position," Michael ordered. "Do not pursue beyond the farmhouse." The German withdrawal accelerated, their remaining tanks disappearing into the morning mist beyond the farm fields. The battlefield fell eerily quiet, the only sounds the crackling of burning tanks and the occasional secondary explosion as ammunition cooked off. "Report casualties," Michael commanded. The response was sobering. Of the 11 tanks that had begun the dawn attack, only 6 remained operational. 5 more crews lost, bringing C Company's total casualties to well over half its original strength. But they had succeeded against overwhelming odds. By Michael's count, they had destroyed at least 8 German tanks in this engagement, including 5 Tigers. Combined with their previous successes, C Company had accounted for more than a dozen German heavy tanks. "Radio battalion," Michael instructed Thompson. "Inform them that the German armor has withdrawn from their defensive position. Request instructions." As they awaited a response, Michael climbed out of his turret to survey the battlefield more directly. The farm fields were littered with burning tanks, both American and German. The morning sun, now fully risen, illuminated a scene of devastation. Gaines joined him atop the tank. "We did it, sir," the veteran said quietly. "Not many believed we could." Michael nodded, feeling a complex mixture of pride in their achievement and grief for the men lost. "The plan worked better than I had any right to expect." "It was a good plan," Gaines affirmed, "and the men executed it perfectly." Thompson's voice interrupted their conversation. "Sir, Colonel Mitchell on the line." Michael took the handset. "Reynolds here." "Captain," Mitchell's voice held unmistakable surprise. "Your report says the German armor has withdrawn." "That's correct, sir. We engaged as ordered at Oaks 100. The enemy has pulled back toward Carentan, leaving the approach road clear." There was a moment of silence before Mitchell responded. "Remarkable work, Reynolds. We expected your company to fix the German position, not drive them off entirely." "My men executed a flanking maneuver during the night," Michael explained. "We attacked from the east at dawn, with the sun at our backs. It gave us the advantage of surprise." "Initiative, I like it." Mitchell's tone was approving. "What's your current strength?" 6 operational tanks, sir. We've lost 16 since landing." Another pause. "Heavy losses, but you've accounted for what, 15 German tanks, including at least 10 Tigers?" "By our count, yes, sir." "2nd Infantry Division is moving up behind you now," Mitchell informed him. "They should reach your position within the hour. Hold where you are and prepare to be relieved." "Understood, sir. And my remaining tanks?" "You'll fall back to the assembly area at St. Laurent for resupply and reinforcement," Mitchell replied. "C Company has more than done its part, Reynolds. Time to let someone else carry the load for a while." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As Michael handed the handset back to Thompson, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Their mission was accomplished. The German armor had been located, engaged, and driven back. The way was clear for the infantry to advance. And most importantly, 6 of his tanks had survived against near impossible odds. "We're being relieved," he informed Gaines. "Infantry is moving up. We're to fall back to St. Laurent for resupply and reinforcement." Gaines nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "The boys will welcome the rest. It's been a hell of a 2 days." "That it has," Michael agreed. He looked back toward the west, where the distant sound of approaching vehicles marked the advance of the 2nd Infantry Division. Help was coming. Their ordeal was nearly over. "Let's get the company formed up," Michael decided. "We'll escort the infantry to the farmhouse, then fall back as ordered." As the surviving tanks of C Company assembled, Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. When he had received command of this unit, he had been a training officer with no combat experience. Colonel Harrison had warned him about the realities of war, about the difference between theory and practice. Now, standing amid the wreckage of battle, Michael understood those warnings in a way no classroom could ever teach. He had led men into combat, made decisions that determined who lived and who died, faced the most fearsome weapons the enemy could deploy. And against almost all odds, he and at least some of his men had survived to fight another day. The distant rumble of American tanks and trucks grew louder. The infantry was coming. Phase 1 of the breakout from the Normandy beachhead was succeeding, in no small part due to the sacrifices of C Company. As Michael surveyed his remaining tanks and crews, he felt a fierce pride. They had accomplished what many would have deemed impossible. They had faced the best the German army could throw at them, and they had prevailed. The cost had been high, too high, but in war, such was always the price of victory. C Company would fight again, and Michael Reynolds, once dismissed as a professor who knew only theory, had proven himself a combat commander worthy of his men's trust. That, he reflected as he ordered his tanks forwards to meet the approaching infantry, was perhaps the most important victory of all. The assembly area at St. Laurent bustled with activity as supply trucks, maintenance crews, and replacement personnel moved among the tanks. C Company's 6 surviving Shermans stood in a neat row, their battle damage evident even from a distance. Mechanics swarmed over them, replacing damaged parts, patching holes, and restoring them to combat readiness. Captain Michael Reynolds sat on an ammunition crate outside a command tent, completing the paperwork that followed combat. Casualty reports, equipment loss forms, after-action assessments. The bureaucracy of war continued, regardless of victory or defeat. "Captain Reynolds?" Michael looked up to see a young lieutenant standing before him, clipboard in hand. "I'm Lieutenant Adams, replacement officer pool. I've been assigned your new personnel." Michael stood, studying the fresh-faced officer. "How many?" 17 tank crew members, sir, mostly inexperienced, but we did get a few veterans from the hospital who've been cleared to return to duty." It was fewer than Michael had hoped for, but better than nothing. C Company needed to rebuild after losing 16 of its 22 tanks. "And replacement tanks?" 8 M4A3s arrived this morning, sir. 2 more expected by evening. Brigade maintenance says your 6 surviving tanks should all be operational by tomorrow. Michael nodded, making quick calculations. 16 tanks total, if all went according to plan. Still 6 short of their original strength, but enough to field a combat-effective company. "What about the 76mm Shermans we were promised?" Adams checked his clipboard. "No record of that, sir. All replacements are standard M4A3s with the 75mm gun." It was disappointing, but not surprising. The newer Shermans with the more powerful guns were in high demand all along the front. C Company would have to make do with what they had. "Very well. Have the replacement crews report to Sergeant Gaines for assignment and orientation." "Yes, sir." Adams hesitated. "If I may say so, sir, the men have heard about what C Company did against those Tigers. They're proud to be joining you." Word traveled fast in an army. The story of C Company's success against the feared German tanks had already become the stuff of legend, growing with each retelling. "Thank them for me, Lieutenant, but remind them that reputation doesn't stop 88 enemy shells. Only good training and discipline do that." After Adams departed, Michael returned to his paperwork. The casualty lists were the hardest part. So many names, so many letters to write to families back home. He had begun the first draft of several when a shadow fell across his desk. "Still working, Captain? The boys are celebrating at the mess tent." Michael looked up to see Sergeant Gaines standing there, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Someone has to document what happened." Michael replied, gesturing at the paperwork. Gaines nodded his understanding. The official record. Important stuff. He paused. But so is letting your men see their commander sharing in their victory. Michael considered this. Gaines was right, of course. Leadership didn't end when the shooting stopped. You're right. The paperwork can wait. He set down his pen and stood. How are Parker, Thompson, and Martinez? Holding up well. Parker's become something of a hero to the new drivers. That last maneuver he pulled, getting us close enough to take out that tiger at point-blank range, they're calling it the Parker slide now. Michael smiled at that. The young farm boy from Iowa had indeed performed remarkably during the battle. And the new crews? Gaines's expression grew more serious. Green as grass, most of them. A few have seen combat in other units, but none in tanks. We'll need time to work them into shape. Time we may not have, Michael noted. Battalion will want us back in the line as soon as possible. Then we'll train them as we go, like we did before. Gaines gestured toward the mess tent. Come on, sir, the boys want to see you. The mess tent was crowded and noisy when they entered. The surviving members of C Company mixed with their new replacements, sharing drinks, stories, and the unique camaraderie that came from shared danger. A cheer went up when Michael entered, men raising their cups in salute. To the captain, someone called out. The Tiger Killer. More cheers followed. Michael felt a flush of embarrassment at the attention, but acknowledged it with a nod and a raised hand. The credit belongs to all of you, he said when the noise died down. Every man, every crew. What C Company accomplished, we accomplished together. He moved through the tent, stopping to speak with each of his surviving original crews. They had changed since landing in Normandy, just days earlier. The eagerness of untested soldiers had been replaced by the quiet confidence of combat veterans. They had faced the best the Germans could throw at them, and they had survived. Thompson, the former mathematics teacher turned radio operator, showed Michael a photograph of his wife and young daughter back in Boston. Martinez, the ex-steelworker who loaded the gun, proudly displayed a captured German officer's pistol. Parker, the youngest of the group, seemed to have aged years and days, his boyish face now carrying the serious expression of a man who had seen death up close. The new replacements watched these interactions with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They were joining a unit that had already created its own identity and history. Michael made sure to greet each of them as well, learning names, hometowns, previous assignments, building the human connections that would bind them together in combat. As the evening wore on, Michael found himself sharing a quiet corner of the tent with Gaines, Collins, and the other surviving original officers and NCOs of C Company. What's next for us, sir? Collins asked. Any word from battalion? Michael shook his head. Not yet, but I expect we'll be back in the line within 48 hours, once our new tanks and crews are integrated. The men are wondering if we'll be sent after more Tigers, Collins continued, after what happened last time. There was an unspoken question in his words. Would C Company be sacrificed again? Sent against overwhelming odds? I don't know, Michael answered honestly. But whatever our next mission, we'll face it with the experience we've gained. We know we can take on Tigers now. We've proven it. The others nodded, taking some comfort in that fact. They had achieved what many thought impossible, destroying German heavy tanks with their outclassed Shermans. They're calling us the Tiger Hunters now, Collins said with a faint smile. I heard some infantry using the name. Could be worse, Gaines observed dryly. Could be calling us the Tiger Bait. The dark humor drew chuckles from the group. Only those who had faced the massive German tanks could fully appreciate the gallows humor. The gathering broke up as evening turned to night, men seeking rest in preparation for the work of rebuilding that would begin in earnest the next day. Michael returned to his tent, intending to complete some of the paperwork before turning in. He found Lieutenant Adams waiting for him with a message. Colonel Mitchell requests your presence at divisional headquarters at 0800 tomorrow, sir. Michael took the written order, scanning it quickly. Did he say what this is about? No, sir, but the runner mentioned something about a special assignment. After Adams left, Michael sat on his cot, contemplating what this summons might mean. Special assignments could be anything from a commendation ceremony to a suicide mission. Given C Company's recent experience with Tigers, he suspected it might be the latter. He turned his attention back to the casualty letters, determined to complete at least a few before sleep claimed him. Each letter was a struggle to balance truth with comfort, to honor the sacrifice without deepening the pain of loss. As he wrote, The faces of the men he had lost appeared in his mind, those he had known personally, and those he had known only by name and service record. This too was part of command, perhaps the hardest part. The divisional headquarters had been established in a French chateau several miles behind the front lines. As Michael entered, he passed staff officers hurrying about with maps and reports, communications personnel manning radio sets, and the general buzz of a command center in the midst of an ongoing offensive. Colonel Mitchell met him in what had once been the chateau's library, now converted to the colonel's office. Maps covered the walls, marking the current front lines and planned advances. "Reynolds," Mitchell greeted him, extending a hand. "Good to finally meet the man who's been giving the Tigers such hell." "Thank you, sir," Michael replied, shaking the offered hand. "My men deserve the credit. Modest as well as effective. I like that." Mitchell gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain. We have important matters to discuss." Michael took the offered seat while Mitchell returned to his place behind a massive oak desk. "I've read your after-action reports," the colonel began. "Impressive work, taking on that many German heavy tanks with standard Shermans. Your tactics were unorthodox but effective." "We adapted to the circumstances, sir." "Indeed you did," Mitchell leaned forward, "which is precisely why I've called you here. I have a special assignment for C Company, one that requires exactly the kind of adaptability you've demonstrated." Michael tensed slightly. Here it came. "Intelligence reports that elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division are regrouping for a major counterattack," Mitchell continued. "They're consolidating their remaining Tigers and Panthers, along with infantry and artillery, in preparation for an assault on our flank." He stood and moved to one of the wall maps, indicating a position marked with a red circle. "This area near the town of Falaise is their assembly point. If they succeed in launching their attack from there, they could potentially cut off our entire advance from the beaches." Michael studied the map. Falaise was some 20 miles from their current position, near the edge of the Allied-controlled territory. "What's the estimated enemy strength, sir?" "At least 20 tanks, mostly Tigers and Panthers, plus supporting infantry and artillery." Mitchell's expression was grim. A formidable force, especially if allowed to attack at a time and place of their choosing. Michael did the mental calculations. 20 German heavy tanks against C Company's projected 16 Shermans. Better odds than their last engagement, but still heavily in the Germans' favor. "I understand the threat, sir. What exactly is our assignment?" Mitchell returned to his desk. "Your company, along with elements of the 2nd Infantry Division, will push toward Falaise ahead of our main advance. Your objective is not to engage the German force directly. That would be suicide. Instead, you're to locate and harass them, disrupt their assembly, delay their counterattack until our main force can arrive in strength." It was, Michael realized, another reconnaissance by fire mission. Find the enemy, make contact, report positions, and hopefully survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. "We're the bait again," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Mitchell didn't seem offended by the characterization. "In a manner of speaking, yes, but with more support this time. You'll have artillery on call, and the infantry will secure your flanks. And most importantly, you'll have air support." That last item caught Michael's attention. "Air support, sir?" "P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force will be on station to respond to any targets you identify." Mitchell smiled slightly. Even a Tiger isn't much match for a 500-pound bomb. It was a significant improvement over their previous mission, where they had been essentially on their own against the German armor. "When do we move out, sir?" "Tomorrow at 0600. Your company should be back to combat strength by then, correct?" 16 tanks, sir, not full strength, but combat effective." Mitchell nodded. "It will have to do. Every available unit is being committed to this push. The Germans are on their heels, and we need to keep them that way." He handed Michael a folder containing the operation orders. "Your specific objectives, recognition signals for the air support, and communication protocols are all in there. Study them carefully. This operation could determine whether we break out of the Normandy beachhead on schedule or get bogged down for weeks." Michael took the folder. "C Company will be ready, sir." "I know you will, Reynolds." Mitchell extended his hand again. "Good hunting. Show those SS bastards what American tankers can do." The drive back to St. Laurent gave Michael time to review the operation orders and consider their implications. C Company was being sent into danger again, but this time with more support and a clearer exit strategy. Their job was to find the Germans, call in airstrikes, and avoid direct engagement with the Tigers if possible. It was still dangerous, but not the near suicidal mission they had faced before. And Michael had to admit There was a certain logic to sending C Company. They had proven they could handle tigers, and they had gained valuable experience that fresh units lacked. When he returned to the assembly area, he found the company in the midst of final preparations. The 6 surviving original tanks had been repaired and refueled, their battle damage patched, though still visible in the mismatched paint. The replacement tanks were being checked over by their new crews, supervised by the veterans. Gaines met him as he parked his Jeep. "How was the meeting with the colonel, sir?" "Enlightening," Michael replied. "Gather the officers and NCOs in the command tent. We have new orders to discuss." Once the leadership of C Company was assembled, Michael laid out their mission: the push toward Falaise, the German counterattack force they were to locate and harass, the air support that would be available to them. "We move out at 0600 tomorrow," he concluded. "The next 48 hours will be critical to the entire Normandy campaign." Collins was the first to respond. "So we're looking for tigers again. But this time we can call in the flyboys instead of taking them on ourselves?" "That's the idea," Michael confirmed. "Though we should be prepared for direct engagement if necessary. The air support may not always be available when we need it." "What about our new crews?" another officer asked. "Most of them have never seen combat, let alone face tigers." "We'll organize the company with at least one experienced crew member in each tank," Michael decided. "And we'll keep the veteran tanks in the lead positions." He looked around the group. "Any other questions?" There were none. The men understood their mission and what was at stake. "Very well. Complete preparations and get some rest. Tomorrow we'll come early." As the others filed out, Gaines remained behind. "You seem more comfortable with this mission than the last one, sir." Michael considered this observation. The odds are still against us, but having air support changes the equation significantly, and we know what we're facing this time. No illusions. Gaines nodded. "The men are ready, even the new ones. Your leadership has given them confidence." Michael was surprised by the compliment from the normally stoic veteran. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means a lot coming from you." "Just stating facts, sir." Gaines moved toward the tent entrance, then paused. "You've changed since we landed, grown into the role. The men see it. They'd follow you anywhere now." After Gaines left, Michael stood alone in the tent, reflecting on the sergeant's words. He had indeed changed since taking command of C Company. The academic knowledge of tanks and tactics he had brought to the role had been tempered by the reality of combat. Theory had given way to practical experience, and somewhere along the way, he had become the commander his men needed him to be. The question now was whether that would be enough to see them through the challenges that lay ahead. The convoy of tanks and supporting vehicles moved out at dawn as planned, taking the road east toward Falaise. C Company led the way, with Michael's tank at the point of the formation. Behind them came trucks carrying infantry, artillery spotters, and the various support elements that would enable their mission. The Norman countryside rolled past, its beauty marred by the signs of war: shattered buildings, cratered fields, the occasional burnout vehicle or hastily dug grave. The front line had moved rapidly eastward in recent days, leaving these marks of its passage. Inside Michael's tank, the crew maintained a professional silence, each man focused on his responsibilities. Parker navigated the narrow country roads with practiced skill. Thompson monitored the radio, relaying updates from the other elements of the convoy. Martinez had arranged his ammunition for maximum efficiency. Gaines scanned the horizon through his binoculars, alert for any sign of the enemy. They had been moving for nearly 3 hours when the radio crackled with a new message. "Captain," Thompson called up from his position, "reconnaissance aircraft reports German vehicle movement approximately 10 miles ahead. Multiple armored vehicles observed moving toward Falaise from the northeast." Michael took the handset. "This is Reynolds. Any identification of vehicle types?" "Negative, sir," came the response. Cloud cover prevented detailed observation, but the pilot reports at least 15 to 20 large vehicles in a dispersed formation. It had to be the German counterattack force they were searching for. The size and careful dispersal suggested heavy tanks trying to avoid air attack. "Understood. Relay to all elements. Possible contact with primary objective. Increase readiness level." Michael returned the handset to Thompson. "Alert the artillery spotters and air support liaison. We may need them soon." The convoy continued its advance, but with heightened vigilance. Scout vehicles moved further ahead, probing for any sign of German forces. Infantry began to deploy in wider formations along the route of march, prepared to provide security. As they approached a small village that stood at a crossroads, a scout jeep came racing back toward the column. "Contact!" the driver shouted as he pulled alongside Michael's tank. "German armor at the far side of the village. At least 3 panthers and what looks like a tiger." Michael immediately began issuing orders. "All elements halt. First platoon, establish observation positions at the western edge of the village. Second platoon, move to cover the southern approach. Third platoon remains in reserve with me." The company smoothly executed the commands, tanks taking up positions that provided both cover and fields of fire. Michael's tank moved to a small rise that offered a view of the village and the terrain beyond. Through his binoculars, Michael could make out the German tanks. They were positioned at the eastern edge of the village, partially concealed among buildings and vegetation. 3 panthers were clearly visible, along with what appeared to be a tiger slightly behind them. "They're screening for something," Gaines observed, looking through his own binoculars. "Those 4 tanks aren't the main force." Michael agreed with the assessment. The main German force must be further east, still assembling. These are just the forward elements. This presented both a challenge and an opportunity. If they engaged these German tanks, they might reveal their presence before locating the main enemy force. But if they could eliminate this forward screen without alerting the main body, they would have a clearer path to their primary objective. "Air support status?" Michael asked Thompson. "P-47s are approximately 20 minutes out, sir. They're currently supporting another operation but can divert on your command." "Artillery?" "Battery of 155mm howitzers standing by, sir. Range confirmed and adjustment shots ready when requested." Michael considered his options. Artillery could suppress the German tanks, but was unlikely to destroy them without direct hits. Air support would be more effective, but would take time to arrive. Or C Company could engage directly, using the tactics they had developed against German armor. "Radio artillery." "Artillery," Michael decided. "Request smoke on the eastern edge of the village. We'll use the cover to advance our observation teams closer." As the orders were relayed, Michael called his platoon leaders on the radio. "First platoon will advance through the village under artillery smoke cover. Mission is observation only, do not engage unless fired upon. Second platoon will provide overwatch from current positions. Third platoon, with me as mobile reserve." The response from first platoon's commander was immediate. "Understood, sir. Moving on your command." The artillery began firing minutes later. White phosphorus shells burst over the German positions, creating a thick smoke screen that obscured visibility. Under this cover, the tanks of 1st Platoon began their cautious advance into the village. Michael watched their progress through his binoculars. The Shermans moved skillfully from building to building, using the structures for cover as they worked their way toward the eastern edge, where the German tanks waited. 1st Platoon reports reaching the church at the village center, Thompson relayed. "No contact with enemy infantry. German tanks are maintaining position at the eastern edge." It was going according to plan so far. The smokescreen was keeping the German tanks blind, while American forces maneuvered closer. Soon they would have accurate positions for artillery or airstrikes. Then everything changed in an instant. "Multiple new contacts," came an urgent call from 1st Platoon. "German armor approaching from the northeast." At least 15 tanks observed, mostly Tigers and Panthers. Almost simultaneously, the German tanks at the edge of the village began to move, pulling back toward their approaching main force. "They've spotted us," Michael realized, "or they're advancing according to a predetermined plan." Either way, the situation was rapidly evolving. The German counterattack force was on the move, earlier than intelligence had predicted. If they reached their planned assembly point, they would be positioned to strike at the vulnerable flank of the Allied advance. "Air support ETA?" Michael demanded. "Still 15 minutes out, sir," Thompson replied. "Too long. The German force would be well established by then, in positions that would make air attacks less effective." Michael made his decision. "All elements prepare to engage. Our mission is to delay the German advance until air support arrives." It was a risky call. 16 Shermans against what appeared to be at least 19 German heavy tanks were not good odds. But if they could slow the German movement, disrupt their formation, and hold them in the open until the P-47s arrived, they might prevent the planned counterattack from materializing. 1st Platoon, engage the German tanks at the village edge. Force them to deploy defensively. 2nd Platoon, circle north and hit the approaching column from the flank. 3rd Platoon, with me, will provide mobile support where needed. The orders set C Company into motion. 1st Platoon's tanks emerged from their positions in the village. guns firing at the retreating German armor. Second platoon moved rapidly along a parallel road, seeking a position to hit the German column from the side. Michael's third platoon followed, ready to reinforce either group as the situation demanded. The battlefield erupted in the thunder of guns and the shriek of shells. The Panthers at the village edge turned to engage first platoon, their long 75mm guns reaching out with deadly accuracy. Two Shermans were hit in the opening exchange, one brewing up immediately with no survivors, the other immobilized but still firing. "Keep moving," Michael ordered over the radio. "Don't give them stationary targets." C Company had learned this lesson the hard way in previous engagements. A moving Sherman was harder to hit, and movement also allowed them to seek better firing positions against the heavily armored German tanks. Second platoon reports they've reached position overlooking the German column, Thompson relayed. "Request permission to engage." "Granted," Michael responded. "Target the vehicles at the rear of the column first. Disrupt their movement." The sound of gunfire increased as second platoon opened up on the German formation from an unexpected direction. The tactic achieved immediate results, forcing the German tanks to halt and turn to face this new threat. "Perfect," Michael observed. "They're deploying to engage second platoon instead of continuing their advance. First platoon, increase pressure from your position." C Company was executing a classic hammer and anvil maneuver, hitting the German force from two directions simultaneously. It wouldn't destroy the superior German tanks, but it was effectively disrupting their planned movement. "Air support update?" Michael asked. 10 minutes out, sir," Thompson replied. "They've been informed of the situation and are coming in hot." 10 minutes was still a long time in armored combat. Already, second platoon was reporting losses as the German tanks brought their superior firepower to bear. "Sir," Gaines called down from his observation position in the turret, "the German column is splitting. Approximately 10 tanks continuing toward the village, the rest turning to engage second platoon." The Germans were adapting, dividing their forces to deal with threats from multiple directions. It was a sound tactical response. "Third platoon with me," Michael ordered. "We're going to hit those tanks heading for the village." Parker guided their Sherman forward, leading the 4 other tanks of third platoon toward an intercept position. They took cover behind a low ridge, waiting for the approaching German tanks to come into view. "Range to target?" Michael asked as the first German tanks appeared. 800 meters, Gaines replied from the gunner's position. "Tigers, by the profile." The distance was at the outer edge of the Sherman's effective range against the heavily armored German tanks. But they had the advantage of surprise in position. "Hold fire until my command," Michael instructed the platoon. "Target tracks and side armor only." The German tanks continued their advance, unaware of the Shermans waiting behind the ridge. When they were within 600 meters, presenting their vulnerable sides, Michael gave the order. "All tanks, fire!" 5 Shermans fired nearly simultaneously, their shells streaking toward the exposed flanks of the German tanks. 2 shots struck home, one immobilizing a Tiger with a direct hit to its track assembly, another penetrating a Panther's thinner side armor. The remaining German tanks reacted quickly, turning to face this new threat and returning fire. Their 88mm shells tore up the earth around the American position, one passing so close to Michael's tank that the crew could hear it shrieking past. "Adjust position," Michael ordered. "Move left along the ridge." Parker expertly maneuvered their Sherman to a new firing position while Gaines reloaded. The other tanks of 3rd Platoon followed suit, using the ridge for cover as they shifted to new locations. The tactic worked, confusing the German gunners who had to acquire new targets after each American movement. It bought precious minutes as the air support drew closer. "First Platoon reports heavy engagement at the village," Thompson called up from the radio. "They've destroyed 1 Panther but lost another tank." "Second Platoon has lost 2 tanks but reports at least 1 Tiger immobilized," came another update. The battle was taking its toll on both sides. C Company was down to 11 operational tanks, but they had succeeded in their primary mission. The German counterattack force was fully committed to combat. Their advance stalled. "Air support 5 minutes out," Thompson reported. "Tell them we'll mark German positions with colored smoke," Michael ordered. "Green smoke on our positions, red on the enemy's." As Thompson relayed the instructions, 3rd Platoon continued its hit-and-run tactics against the German tanks. They would fire from covered positions, then quickly move before the Germans could respond effectively. "Sir," Gaines called out suddenly, 3 Tigers breaking off, heading east at high speed." Michael swung his binoculars to observe. Indeed, 3 of the massive German tanks had disengaged and were moving rapidly away from the battle. They're trying to continue the original mission, he realized. While the rest keep us occupied, those three will push on to the assembly point. It was a clever tactic, one that threatened to undermine C Company's efforts. If even a portion of the German force reached their planned position, they could still launch an effective counterattack. Parker, full speed. We're going after those tigers. Michael switched to the company radio channel. Third platoon, with me. We're pursuing the tigers moving east. First and second platoons continue engagement. It was a risky decision, splitting his already outnumbered force further, but they couldn't allow any portion of the German armored group to reach their assembly point. Parker pushed their Sherman to its maximum speed, racing along a parallel track to intercept the fleeing German tanks. The other tanks of 3rd Platoon followed, spread out to avoid presenting a concentrated target. Air support 3 minutes out, Thompson updated. Tell them priority targets are now the Tigers moving east, Michael instructed. They must not reach their assembly point. The Sherman's engine roared as Parker guided it up a small rise that would give them a firing position ahead of the German tank's path. They reached the position just as the 3 Tigers came into view, moving rapidly along a country lane. Gunner, lead Tiger, Michael ordered. Target tracks. Gaines sighted through his scope and fired. The shell fell short, kicking up dirt just in front of the German tank. Adjusting, Gaines said calmly, making corrections to his aim. Firing. The second shot was true, striking the lead Tiger's left track and snapping it. The massive tank slewed to a halt, blocking the narrow lane and forcing the other 2 Tigers to stop as well. All tanks fire at will, Michael commanded. The 5 Shermans of a 3rd platoon opened fire on the halted German tanks. Most shots bounced harmlessly off their thick frontal armor, but the volume of fire kept the Tigers pinned in place, unable to maneuver effectively. The lead German tank managed to traverse its turret and return fire, its 88mm gun finding one of the Shermans. The American tank erupted in flames, its crew bailing out as ammunition began to cook off inside. Keep firing, Michael urged. We just need to hold them until air support arrives. As if on cue, the distinctive sound of aircraft engines filled the air. Looking up, Michael saw the welcome sight of P-47 Thunderbolts approaching from the west, their wings loaded with bombs and rockets. Thompson, radio the air liaison. Confirmed targets are the 3 Tigers on the road junction at grid reference 781045. Already done, sir, Thompson replied. They've acknowledged and are making their approach. All tanks, deploy smoke and pull back, Michael ordered. Let the flyboys do their work. The Shermans fired smoke grenades to mark their own positions with green smoke, while also launching red smoke shells near the German tanks. Then they began to withdraw to a safer distance. The P-47s came in low and fast, the lead aircraft firing rockets that struck around the immobilized Tigers. The second plane dropped bombs that landed with devastating accuracy, a direct hit lifting one of the German tanks partially off the ground before it crashed back down, flames erupting from every hatch. The 3rd P-47 finished the job, its rockets and machine guns ensuring that none of the 3 Tigers would ever move again. The German crews that survived the initial blasts were cut down as they tried to escape their burning vehicles. Target destroyed, Thompson relayed from the radio. Air liaison reports they're moving to support 1st and 2nd platoons now. Michael watched as the P-47s banked around for another attack run, this time heading for the main engagement area where the rest of C Company was still fighting the larger German force. 3rd Platoon, regroup on me, he ordered. We're heading back to support the main action. As they moved back toward the village, Michael could see black smoke rising from multiple burning tanks. The distinctive explosions of aerial bombs punctuated the ongoing tank battle as the P-47s went to work on the remaining German armor. By the time 3rd Platoon reached the battle area, the tide had already turned. The combination of ground and air attacks had broken the German formation. Those tanks that could still move were retreating eastward, no longer a coherent fighting force. All elements report, Michael commanded. The responses painted a sobering picture. Of C Company's 16 tanks that had started the day, only 9 remained operational, 7 crews lost along with their vehicles. But they had achieved their objective. The German counterattack force had been located, engaged, and largely destroyed. Those tanks that escaped were too few and too disorganized to pose the threat they had originally represented. Sir? Thompson called up from the radio. Colonel Mitchell on the line. Michael took the handset. Reynolds here. Captain, we're getting reports of a major engagement near your position. Mitchell's voice crackled through the static. What's your situation? C Company engaged elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division as they were moving to their assembly point, Michael reported. With air support, we've destroyed approximately 12 to 15 German tanks, mostly Tigers and Panthers. The remainder are in retreat eastward, no longer a coherent force. There was a moment of silence before Mitchell responded. Remarkable. Intelligence estimated at least 20 tanks in that formation. That's approximately correct, sir. We've accounted for most of them. Casualties? Michael hesitated. 7 tanks lost, sir. Several more damaged, but repairable. Another pause. High cost, Reynolds, but potentially worth it. That counterattack could have set our entire advance back by weeks. The men understood the stakes, sir. I'm sure they did. Mitchell's tone softened slightly. Hold your position. Reinforcements are moving up to secure the area. Medical evacuation teams are en route for your wounded. Thank you, sir. And Reynolds, well done. Again. As Michael handed the handset back to Thompson, he climbed out of the turret to survey the battlefield more directly. The scene was one of devastation. Burning tanks, both German and American, dotted the landscape. Medics were already moving among the wounded, providing what care they could. Infantrymen secured the area, wary of German stragglers. Gaines joined him, wiping grime from his face with a bandana. We did it, sir. Stop them cold. Michael nodded, at a cost. Always is. The veteran gestured toward the burning Tigers in the distance. But think of how many lives those boys saved by preventing that counterattack. The Germans would have hit our supply lines, our field hospitals, everything. It was small comfort for the men they had lost, but it was something. Their sacrifice had meaning, had purpose, had saved others. As the day wore on, the full extent of their achievement became clearer. Intelligence reports confirmed that they had engaged and largely destroyed elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division's heavy tank battalion. The planned German counterattack had been preempted, allowing the Allied advance to continue unhindered. By evening, C Company had been relieved by fresh units moving up from the beaches. Their remaining tanks were being serviced by maintenance teams, preparing them for withdrawal to the rear for rest and refit. Michael found himself standing beside one of the destroyed Tigers, studying the massive German tank that had been the source of so much fear and loss. Up close, it was even more impressive than in photographs or training manuals. Its size, its armor, its devastating gun. A technological marvel, but ultimately vulnerable to determined opposition and combined arms tactics. Quite something, isn't it? A voice said from behind him. Michael turned to find Colonel Mitchell approaching, accompanied by several staff officers. Yes, sir. It's my first chance to examine one up close when it isn't trying to kill me. Mitchell smiled at that. I wanted to see the battlefield for myself, understand exactly what C Company accomplished here. He surveyed the destroyed German tanks. The brass won't believe it without photographic evidence. A company of Shermans taking on a battalion of Tigers and Panthers. We had air support, Michael pointed out, and artillery. It was a combined arms victory. True, but it was your company that found them, engaged them, held them for the flyboys to finish off. Mitchell clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. Don't sell yourself short, Reynolds. What you and your men did here was extraordinary. The colonel moved closer to the Tiger, examining the battle damage. High Command is already talking about using this action as a case study. How to engage superior enemy armor successfully. Your tactics will be taught to new tank commanders. It was a strange thought. Michael had begun this war as an instructor, teaching tactics from manuals and theoretical studies. Now his own combat experiences would become part of that curriculum. What happens to C Company now, sir? He asked. You've earned a rest, Mitchell replied. Your unit will be pulled back to the rear area for at least 2 weeks. Replacements, retraining, recovery time. He paused. After that, it depends on how the campaign develops. But I suspect the 12th SS won't forget the lesson you taught them today. The myth of the invincible Tiger has been thoroughly debunked. As Mitchell and his staff continued their inspection of the battlefield, Michael made his rounds of the remaining tanks and crews. Each man was exhausted but carried a quiet pride in what they had accomplished. They had faced the most fearsome weapons the enemy could deploy, and they had prevailed. When he reached his own tank, he found Parker sitting on the front slope, cleaning a track assembly with meticulous care. How's she running? Michael asked. The young driver looked up. Good as new, sir. Well, almost. She took a few hits, but nothing vital. It was a fair description of them all. Damaged but not broken. Still functional despite the ordeals they had endured. We're pulling back tomorrow, Michael informed him. 2 weeks in the rear area for rest and refit. Parker nodded, though he didn't seem particularly excited by the news. And after that? Back to the line, I imagine. The war isn't over yet. No, sir. Parker returned to his work. But we've shown them what we can do, haven't we? Those tigers aren't so scary anymore. Michael smiled at the young man's growing confidence. No, Parker. They're not so scary anymore. Washington, D.C., 2004. And that's how it happened, Michael Reynolds concluded, his aged voice growing hoarse from the telling. C Company went on to fight all the way into Germany, but those first battles in Normandy were the defining moments. His grandson, Jack, had listened to the entire account in rapt silence. Now, as they stood before the Sherman tank in the museum, the boy looked at the vehicle with new understanding and respect. What happened to the others? Jack asked. Your crew? Parker became a mechanical engineer after the war. Designed agricultural equipment, if you can believe it. Said driving a tank taught him everything he needed to know about machines under stress. Michael smiled at the memory. Thompson went back to teaching mathematics. Martinez opened his own metal fabrication shop in Chicago. And Sergeant Gaines? A shadow passed across Michael's weathered features. Gaines didn't make it. We lost him during the Battle of the Bulge. German 8E, direct hit on our tank. Parker, Thompson, and I managed to get out. Gaines and Martinez didn't. Jack absorbed this sobering information. I'm sorry, Grandpa. It was a long time ago, Michael replied, but I still remember him every day. The finest soldier I ever knew. They continued their tour of the museum, moving from exhibit to exhibit, Michael occasionally offering corrections to the placards based on his first-hand experiences. The curators had the technical specifications right, but they couldn't capture what it had truly been like to face a Tiger tank with nothing but a Sherman and determination. As they prepared to leave, Jack surprised his grandfather with a question. Grandpa, do you think I would have had what it takes to do what you did? Michael studied his grandson thoughtfully. At 18, Jack was at the same age many of his men had been when they faced the Tigers of Normandy. I do, he said finally. You have the same qualities they had. Not fearlessness, that's a myth. Every man who climbed into a tank was afraid, but courage, the willingness to do what needs to be done despite the fear. Jack seemed to consider this. I've been thinking about enlisting after graduation. The words didn't surprise Michael as much as they might have. He had seen the way Jack studied the exhibits, not with the detached interest of a casual observer, but with the focused attention of someone contemplating a similar path. Your parents won't like it, Michael observed. No, Jack agreed, but it's my decision. True enough. Michael rested his hand on his grandson's shoulder. If that's what you choose, I'll support you. And I'll tell you what I told my men in Normandy. Training and teamwork matter more than technology. The best weapon isn't the biggest gun, but the people who stand beside you. They exited the museum into the bright Washington afternoon, a young man at the threshold of his life, and an old warrior nearing the end of his. Between them stretched the invisible bonds of shared understanding, the legacy of those who had faced the steel giants of Normandy and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. One more thing, Jack, Michael said as they walked toward their car. If you do enlist, remember this. War changes you. You won't come back the same person who left. I went to Normandy as a captain who knew tanks from books and training fields. I came back as someone who had seen what tanks can do to men and what men can do with tanks. Was it worth it? Jack asked. The change? Michael considered the question seriously. For me, yes. I found out who I really was in those hedgerows of Normandy. Facing those tigers taught me more about leadership, about myself, than all my years at West Point. He paused. But every man has to find his own answer to that question. As they drove away from the museum, Michael cast one last glance back at the building that housed the Sherman tank he had once called home. So much of his life had been defined by those days in Normandy, by the men he had led and lost, by the metal monsters they had faced and defeated. Tigers and Shermans, Germans and Americans. The details faded with time, but the essence remained. Ordinary men accomplishing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. That, Michael reflected, was the true legacy of C Company. Not the tanks they had destroyed or the battles they had won, but the example they had set for future generations, including perhaps his grandson.